interrogation room, the atmosphere was heated to the max. Samuel Smith, a young investigator, was trying to clear a criminal suspect. At first, the young wealthy lady resisted, and at first glance her alibi was irrefutable. But the investigator knew how to ask unexpected questions, seemingly completely irrelevant to the case. The man was lost and answered sincerely as it is. Then he himself was surprised at what little things he had been caught on, and so it was this time. In the end, the lady confessed to what she had done and wrote a sincere confession. The woman was taken away, and a colleague complimented Samuel. "Well done, Samuel, well done. It's in your family to solve cases. Your father was the best investigator, and now you're following in his footsteps. You cracked that Ingrid so well." 3 questions, and the lady's gone. Samuel finished the case and hurried home at last after an exhausting 24 hours. His head was pounding and his stomach was churning with at least a liter of coffee. It was a difficult job for an investigator. An irregular day and endless confrontations, interrogations, visits to crime scenes, brainstorming sessions. The man wanted only one thing: peace and quiet and sleep. But from the doorstep his son rushed into his arms. He was gibbering with joy. "Hurrah, Daddy's here. I missed you so much. Come on, I'll show you what kind of dinosaur I made with plasticine. Can we go to the park? You promised. Mom doesn't want to go out with me. She always has a headache and I'm bored at home." Samuel smiled, hugging the little fidgety boy tightly. The fatigue was gone. He praised the little one for the beautiful craft, talked to him a little, and promised that when he had eaten, they would go for a walk. Anthony left to wait, switched on cartoons, and Samuel went into the bedroom to change. His wife was lying on the bed with a disgruntled look, a shawl on her head. The man asked restlessly, "What's wrong, Iris? Are you ill? Should I call a doctor?" "Anthony says you haven't even had a walk today, and there's no lunch." The woman perked up at the mention of her son and began to complain. "Yes, Samuel, that child makes me sick. He and I don't get along at all. He screams, runs like an elephant round the flat, throws everything around. I can't get any peace, and I have a migraine. I can't stand loud noises at all. And don't blame me about dinner. There's some of last night's soup heated up." Samuel sighed. Ever since little Anthony had come into the family, his wife had been changed. Where had the gentle, affectionate woman gone? Now she was a grumpy person. 3 years ago, Samuel's best friend Matthew died on a dangerous mission, and his wife left after him, a heart attack. Little 1-year-old Anthony was left an orphan. The boy wanted to be sent to an orphanage, but Samuel would not allow it. He adopted the child, took pity on the boy, loved him almost immediately. How could you not love a trusting, affectionate little boy? Iris, on the other hand, took the boy in stride. Then, however, she accepted it, but she could not love Anthony as her own, and the more the child demanded her attention, the more irritated she became. Anthony interfered with her, tangled under her feet, and took almost all her time. The woman blamed her husband, saying that he was always at work, and her son on her. She is tired, and he does not care. Every year the situation grew more and more heated, and today Samuel finally realized that it could not go on like this. He decided to hire a nanny for his son and relieve his beloved wife. Maybe then things would get better for the family. Samuel cooked a simple dinner, took Anthony for a walk, bathed him and put him to bed himself, already exhausted. His wife lay all evening on the sofa, feigning indisposition. Before going to bed, the man took in his hands a portrait of his beloved mother. She looked at him with warm and pure eyes, so young and beautiful. Samuel almost cried. How many years had passed since his mom had gone missing, and he still missed her and longed to find her. This tragedy had forever divided his life into before and after. Samuel's dad, Mr. Ben, was also an investigator. He devoted his entire life to the job he loved. It was because of his profession that his father and mother fought so often. Not every woman can endure the constant absences of her spouse and eternal worry. And still Samuel considered his family to be exemplary. His mom loved him very much. The house was always cozy, clean, smelling of fresh baked goods. He adored his dad too. He was an example to him in everything. But they didn't see each other very often. When Samuel was 13, his mom disappeared. There was no sign of trouble. She simply went out to the shop with a light jacket and a simple shopping bag and never came back. At first, Samuel still believed that Mum would be found, that it's never the case that a person disappears without a trace. He resented his father a lot. He looked for her, but he didn't seem to be looking for her. And then he gave up on it altogether. He removed all his mum's things from the house and forbade his son to talk about her. There was some mystery to her disappearance, but no matter how many times Samuel questioned his father, he remained stubbornly silent or angry. It was probably for this reason that the young man went to work as an investigator without a second thought. He was obsessed with finding his mum. But so many years had passed and there was no trace of her. It was an unbearable torture of the unknown. Maybe if he knew his mum was dead, he'd feel better. He could have gone to her grave to check on her. The man lay there, looking at her portrait and thinking, "If you were there now, Mum, you'd probably understand and support me. You'd love to babysit Anthony. Where are you, my darling? Are you alive or not? Maybe you've lost your memory and forgotten everything. It's okay. I'll find you. I promise." During the night, my son must have had a terrible dream. He ran with his little legs to the nearest and dearest person. He wanted to crawl into his mum's arms, but Iris whispered irritably, "Anthony, what are you doing now? Come to bed." The baby cried and wailed, "Mummy, I'm scared there's a bogeyman in there. Can I sleep with you? Please." The woman poked her husband in the side. "Samuel, when will it stop? My son's all grown up and he still walks around at night like a snotty little girl." The man marveled. How could his wife not feel sorry for the little one? He stretched out his arms, picked Anthony up, and laid him next to him, comforting and whispering to him, "Come here, son. Your feet are so icy. It's all right, little one. Go to sleep. Daddy's there." The baby immediately fell asleep. Instantly, he felt safe, and Samuel felt so warm inside. He adored his son. This defenseless little man was the closest thing he had to family. And for the umpteenth time, Samuel thought that his marriage to Iris was doomed if she continued to treat her son that way. And in the morning, the whirlwind of work began again. Samuel was called to another crime. This time, it was the theft of an expensive brooch from one of the restaurant's customers. A young, poorly dressed girl sat crying in the manager's office, and the receptionist shouted, "How could you steal a brooch from our regular customer? The director took pity on you, took you to a decent place. And this is how you thank me? Well, the cops are here. They'll take you to jail." The girl was crying. "Oh, I didn't steal anything. I've got so much work to do. I don't have time to think. Why don't you believe me?" Across from her sat a formidable, elderly, expensively dressed woman. She looked at the girl unkindly and remained silent. The investigator commanded, showing his ID. "My name is Samuel Smith. I'll be conducting the interview now. The suspect stays in the office. Everyone else out. When the suspect leaves, the victim will come in. Is that clear?" The man took out a paper and a pen and started asking questions. "Your surname, first name, and your passport. Are you going to write a confession? I was told the jewelry was found in your handbag. Seems pretty obvious to me. So you couldn't help yourself, you got the wrong idea. Isn't that right?" The girl suddenly became angry and replied sharply, "And Cage, I don't have a passport, I'm homeless, so you can pin everything on me, and I can see no one believes me. Give me some paper and a pen. I'll sign whatever I need to sign. What's the point of telling the truth if nobody wants it?" The investigator was taken aback by the pressure. He saw that Anne wasn't lying, so he asked, "Wait a minute, so you really didn't take anyone else's? Well, let's go through it again from the beginning and in order. Why are you undocumented? How did you get a job then? I don't understand." The girl couldn't stand it any longer and started talking. "I was born and grew up in a village, and my mom was my only support. I don't know my father. We lived hard, worked hard, but I'm not complaining. Those were probably the best years when Mummy was alive. A couple of years ago, my stepdad showed up at our house. I don't know what Mummy saw in him or why she loved him at all. And Freddie was unbearable. He got drunk, had drunken debauches, raised his hand at me, and Mum drank the last of it. Mum realized her mistake and tried to kick this tyrant out, but to no avail. He behaved like a master and had no intention of going anywhere. 6 months ago, Mum died. She couldn't stand such a hard life, and my life went to hell. My stepdad went off the rails, started bringing his mates home. They attacked me a couple of times. It was a miracle I escaped. Those drunks left me no way out. I had to go to the city, but I guess I was born unlucky. They stole my passport and the rest of my money at the station. That's all. Now I'm homeless. I went to the police and the passport office. I have to get my documents restored. But that's not free either. The owner of the market stall took me on out of pity. Illegally, of course, I slept there, sold vegetables. I was happy. I thought he'd pay me and I'd go and get a passport. But I had no luck. The landlord started to pester me, getting angry, saying I was a beggar myself, pretending to be a beggar. But I couldn't do that. Anyway, he threw me out without paying a penny. I went to the river in despair. Honestly, I wanted to drown myself. What a dog's life. And then I saw a tiny puppy. He was stuck in the mud, barely struggling. But I didn't hesitate and ran after him. I got soaked and dirty myself, but I got it out. I saw that he was a thoroughbred, and his collar had Charlie's name and his owner's phone number. So I called him. It turned out to be the restaurant manager's puppy, Mr. Edward. Anyway, he took pity on me and got me a job as a cleaner. Illegally, too. And it turns out I let him down big time. Now he's going to get in trouble for it. I didn't even know about the brooch, and I only clean the gym when there's no customers. But think about it, how and when I could have stolen the brooch. I swear someone set me up, but I don't know how to prove it. And I don't have the energy for anything else. Whatever happens, maybe prison will be better than a bedbug-infested lodging house. Where do you want me to sign? I'll sign everything. The investigator said quietly, "You don't know what prison is, so don't be in a hurry to get there. Wait for me in the corridor and call the victim." The lady who'd had her brooch stolen entered the office. Samuel started asking around. "Name, surname, and ID, please. When did you notice the brooch was missing? Was it pinned to your dress, or was it in your bag?" The woman grudgingly replied, "Mrs. Vanessa Pete. With my own beauty parlor business, I often go to this restaurant for a meal. The place seems decent. I like the food. The service is top-notch. Such an unpleasant incident for the first time. I had a brooch pinned to my coat. I left it in the cloakroom, and when I was about to leave, I realized it was gone. I started to get indignant, and the cloakroom attendants searched the whole wardrobe. They thought maybe it had fallen down, but the jewelry was nowhere to be found. Naturally, I went to the manager. He made everyone who works here show their bags. And this cleaning lady found my brooch. I want her punished to the full extent of the law." Samuel asked, "Stay here for a while. I need to check something." He went to the security room and looked at the kecked footage. Someone had deliberately erased them in the cloakroom, but the other cameras showed that Anne had been scrubbing and cleaning all day without even going near the cloakroom. So she definitely had nothing to do with it. He told the director about it. "You strange people, before you blame the poor cleaner, you should have seen the video. There's no way she stole the brooch. So someone on the staff set her up. We'll have to interview everyone. I assure you, I will get to the bottom of this," said Samuel. He went back into the office and told Mrs. Vanessa Pete. "It wasn't the cleaner's fault, that's for sure. Someone on the staff planted your brooch on her. Why? I don't know yet, but at least let me see your jewelry." The woman put the brooch on the table, and Samuel froze. He was speechless. It was his mom's brooch, and she'd definitely been wearing it the day she went missing. So there could be no mistake. This piece of jewelry had been custom-made especially for his mom on her birthday. The man could barely contain himself and began to question. "Tell me, where did you get this brooch? It doesn't belong to you either. Where did you get it? And don't try to tell tall tales. It's my own mother's brooch. Take a look at this picture. My mother disappeared a long time ago. I haven't been able to find her for years." The woman was also confused and told it like it was. "I'm not going to lie. Why would I do that? I used to have a housekeeper. I don't remember her name, to be honest. Then she got really sick and begged me to buy this thing. She needed money urgently for treatment. But I bought the brooch. I knew right away it was expensive. And I fired her. She couldn't take care of a house like that anymore. Let me see your mom's photo again." "I don't know. She's a young, beautiful woman, but she wasn't like that before. I don't think she was. Samuel's got his spirits up. There's a lead back to his mum. That was a success. He started to persuade the victim. Mrs. Pete, why don't you take the statement? The brooch was found. It wasn't the cleaner's fault. So why ruin her life? I'll find the culprits. I'm sure you will. The woman reluctantly agreed. She was embarrassed. It turns out she had once kicked out the investigator's mother, and she bought that brooch for nothing. She wanted to get away and forget the unpleasant incident. Samuel, please, Dan. Well, consider yourself lucky. I got the victim to take a statement. Go back to work. But be careful. Someone's obviously not happy here and is trying to survive. And my advice to you is don't wait too long to get your papers back. You can't live a normal life without them, and I can help you with accommodation. I have a little old granny's house on the outskirts. It's only got a stove. If it suits you, I can let you stay there. And here are the keys. I see you're a normal girl, not lost, and I want you to get on with your life. And cried and started to thank me. Oh my God, I can't believe it. Thank you so much. I'll do it, even without facilities. I can't go to the lodgings anymore. I promise I'll use my first paycheck to get my papers back. I want to get out of this vicious circle myself. Samuel continued his interview and waited for the receptionist. He was eager to talk to this slippery-looking man, but the director surprised him. You know, Mr. Williams' blood pressure's been spiking from all this. They've taken him to hospital, but as soon as he's better, he'll come straight to you. It's been such an unpleasant story. I don't know who could have set Anne up like that. She's so quiet, she wouldn't hurt a fly. She's a hard worker. Who's she bothering? I promise I'll deal with the staff myself. Please, let's just leave it at that. I'm sorry to have taken up your time. Samuel didn't mind. He had a lot to do today. All he could think about was where to find his mom. He reasoned that if she was very ill, maybe he should look in a hospice. You never know, you might get lucky. The important thing was not to be too late, as long as Mum was alive. But even if Samuel wasn't, I still wanted to know the truth. He'd even taken time off work to methodically check out these places. There wasn't much hope. It had been years, but he'd been lucky again. At one of the hospices, a helpful nurse found Samuel's mum on the list and even remembered her story. Yeah, we had a patient like that, and according to the records, it was 7 years ago. That's why I remembered her. She had a terminal illness. Doctors only gave her a couple of months to live. She heard from someone about a healer in a remote village. Rumor has it she works miracles. Nobody knows her real name, but they call her Maloney. So your mum went to her without much hope, but she had nothing to lose. What difference does it make where she dies? But believe me, your mum's definitely not alive. With a disease like hers, no healer can help. Alas, Samuel, as if he'd found the trail, was almost shouting. I beg you, give me the exact address. Where can I find this Maloney? I don't believe Mum's gone. I want to see for myself. And the nurse shook her head, dictated the address, and waved her hand, saying, do what you want. Samuel phoned his wife and said he wouldn't be home for the night. He was staying on assignment. Iris was angry that she would have to stay with her son again, but she let him go, promising to keep an eye on Anthony. The journey was long and tiring. Samuel reached that godforsaken village almost in the evening. The locals told him where to find the witch's cottage. An old, almost blind old woman opened the door and led him into the courtyard. Good night, my boy. Why have you come here? I see you're not from here. You've come from far away. What's wrong? For help. You don't just come to visit me. The man asked excitedly. I'm sorry to disturb you. My name is Samuel. I've been looking for my mum for years, Linda Smith. I found out she used to visit you a long time ago. Do you remember? My mum's been missing for years, and I'm still looking for her. It's heartbreaking. I've got a photo of her too. Take a look. Maybe you'll remember. You're my last hope. Melanie looked at the guest, sighed, and replied, I knew you'd come. I felt it. Come in, your mum's here. You two have a lot to talk about. I won't interrupt. Samuel couldn't believe it. He walked into the room and saw his mum. Barely recognized her. She was gray-old, wrinkles all over her face. But the eyes, they were still his mum's warm eyes. She looked at him guiltily and was afraid to smile, as if frozen. The son, on the contrary, rushed to hug her. "Mummy, mummy, mummy. Did I find you? I can't believe it. All these years of searching. I thought you'd lost your memory or you were dead. Tell me everything, please. How did you disappear? Where did you disappear to without a trace? What happened to you? Why haven't you come back in all these years? Didn't you miss me at all? What about your father?" Linda didn't dare to look up. She was unbearably ashamed in front of her own son. She lowered her head and began to tell her story. "Forgive me, Samuel, if you can. I'm so very sorry to you, my son, and to Ben. There's no forgiveness for me. Your father and I didn't have a very good life. I could hardly stand his constant ambushes. He was shot twice. Every day was a nerve-wracking experience. You could say I put up with it all just for you. And then I met Michael by chance. He gave me a lift in the rain. We got to talking. We were friends at first, and then I fell in love. I fell head over heels in love like crazy. I was married, he was single, had a wife and 2 young children. And even that didn't stop us. Michael suggested we just run away from everyone, go into another city and start a new life there. And I wanted to tell Ben and you, but I chickened out. I couldn't. And it took me a long time to decide whether to leave my family or not. Your father wasn't a stupid man, especially as an investigator. He knew right away that I was with another man. Tracked us down. Michael got beaten up, and he told me he'd never grant a divorce or let me bring shame on the family. We broke up with Michael for a while. I honestly tried to forget him, but Ben despised me. He wouldn't even touch me. I cried into my pillow at night. I was also desperately homesick for Michael. And that day he suddenly rang me and said he was waiting for me at the railway station. It was now or never, and I was gone forever from my home, from my family, from your life. I realized I betrayed you, son, but I didn't realize it until much later. I thought Michael and I would go away, things would get better. I'd take you in. But things turned out very differently. Things didn't work out between Michael and me in the new place. He loved me a lot, but he missed the kids too. They kept calling him, and after a couple of months he went to see them and never came back to me. He apologized on the phone, apologized for a long time. That's the whole story. Samuel was surprised. What about you? Why didn't you come to your senses and come home? I'm sorry, but I don't understand. Linda took a sip of water and continued. And I didn't know what I was going to do without Michael. My life just stopped. I was ready to destroy myself. I loved him so much. I missed you, son, but I knew I could never live with Ben again. I rang him, begging him to let me take you back. But Ben was relentless, calling me a tramp and telling me to get the hell out. And he was absolutely right. What kind of a mother am I if I spit on my husband and my own son and ran away to a strange man? Anyway, I started drinking. Almost went completely down, but I came to my senses in time. At one time I worked as a housekeeper, and then I got seriously ill. The doctors didn't give me any chances. They sent me to a hospice to die. A woman told me about a healer named Maloney. I decided to come here to see her. She got me back on my feet. Not right away, of course. It took a year to fully recover. So I stayed with Melanie, helping her. I gather herbs, we prepare ointments and tinctures together. We help people cope with their troubles. I know it's hard to understand and accept. If you curse me, you'll be right. Samuel clutched his head. Mom, I don't know what to say. I really don't understand how you could live for so many years and never once at least call me and find out how I'm doing. Don't you really care? It's cruel. I still have your picture. I've looked everywhere for you. How can you do that? Tell me. Please, let's go home. I'm married with a son, Anthony. I'll introduce you. He'll take care of you. Why would you want to live in the middle of nowhere when you have a family? Linda shook her head, cried bitterly, and replied, No, son, I have no family. I betrayed myself, cut it out of my life. Now my vocation is something else, to help people until my last days. I won't leave Melanie. She's old. She's almost blind. She can't do it alone. I'm sorry, love. It's my choice. Accept it. Samuel swallowed back tears, resentment for his mom and pity and love for her all mixed together. He wrapped his arms around his head and sat silent, unable to utter a word. Melanie came into the room, took his hand in hers and said, You married the wrong woman. She is not your destiny. She will ruin you. The one who is your destiny is already near. Only stretch out your hand and look round. Only with her your heart will be at rest. Remember, she will bear you a daughter and raise and love your son. Don't hold grudges against your mother. She's destroying you. Let go. Accept everything as it is. You better come to visit. Bring your family. We'll be glad. Now go to dinner. We'll go to bed. We'll sleep in the morning. Samuel himself did not know why he obeyed this infirm old woman. He ate baked potatoes with sauerkraut, drank some fragrant tea, and, surprisingly, fell asleep so sweetly. In the morning, the man woke up to his mother stroking his head, as she had once done when he was a child, and whispering softly, "Samuel, my poor little son, forgive your mother. I will still love you. You're still that 13-year-old boy to me. That's how I'll remember you." The man pressed against his mum's cheek and whispered, "I still love you, Mum, even after what I learned yesterday. Let everything be as you decide, but I won't leave you again. I'll come and visit, and I'll introduce you to Anthony. He's such a nice boy. Will you be friends with him? Just don't go away again, please." Samuel was finally relieved. He'd found his mum, and it felt so good, so peaceful. The man missed her and was a little worried about his son, so he flew home on wings. He bought groceries and a toy car on the way. He shouted from the doorstep, "Hello, everybody. Iris, Anthony, where are you? Why aren't you here?" So there was a ringing silence in the flat. The man was scared out of his wits and started calling his wife, but the phone was unavailable. Samuel panicked. He ran to his neighbor, Mrs. Johnson. They were close friends. The woman sometimes helped out by looking after his son. Mrs. Johnson, on seeing the man on the doorstep, immediately let him in and began whispering, "Thank God, Samuel, you're back. Iris asked me to babysit Anthony for an hour yesterday. She said she had a work call. So I said yes. Turns out the baby was sick. I didn't even realize it at first. I saw he was lethargic, sad. He refuses to eat, just mooing. And then he asked to go to bed. Good thing I thought to take his temperature. He was 38.5 and his throat was red. I tried to call Iris, but she wouldn't answer the phone. Oh, I was scared. I gave him some antipyretics. But it's been 24 hours now, and he's no better. And I'm nobody to him, a stranger. God forbid." Samuel rushed into the bedroom. His son was lying there, wrapped in a blanket, dozing. When he heard the noise, his father's voice, he jumped up. He cried, threw himself on his neck, and started shouting, "Hurrah! Daddy, have you come? Mummy never came for me, and you weren't here. I thought you'd left me. I'm so sick, Daddy. I have a sore throat and a headache. Let's go home." The man took his son in his arms and began to thank his neighbor. "Thank you so much, Mrs. Johnson. I'm sorry about what happened. I thought my son was with his mum, and this happened." Samuel called the doctor. He calmed him down, said it was just a cold. He prescribed some medicine and left. The man bought everything, started treating his son. He took a sick day at work. Even though the bosses were very unhappy, the kid was cheerful. He never left his daddy's side for a minute. They watched cartoons together. Later, the fever broke, Anthony ate and fell asleep. And Samuel was angry. Where the hell is his wife? How was it possible to leave his son and go somewhere and not even call? Not to say. The man called Iris 1,000 times. He was already nervous. He checked everything. Hospitals, morgues. He had worked himself up to the limit. At about midnight, finally the key in the lock turned, and his wife entered the flat. The light clicked on, and right from the doorstep. "Oh, Samuel, are you home? You scared me. Why are you sitting in the dark?" The man came out. "Where have you been? Why don't you ask where your son is? Are you out of your mind?" So the woman was not embarrassed in the slightest. "I left Anthony since 7 p.m. Well, it just so happened. It was an emergency. We'll pick him up in the morning. That old neighbor has nothing better to do anyway. Let her babysit. You're a good man yourself, always at work or somewhere else. And you're shaming me. I'm sick of living like this. If you want to know, I spend 24 hours a day with a child, a stranger's child, mind you. I can't see the light of day. He annoys me, even pisses me off. He's always whining, getting in my way, hugging me. Why did you adopt him? We were doing so well without him. Yeah, I thought I'd get a bit of a break. What's the big deal? So don't give me any moralizing or I'll get divorced. Then you'll have your own son to deal with. Iris, you're not a woman, you're a monster. Anthony's sick and you don't even care. You didn't even notice. You know, I'm sick of this life too. You're right. We should get a divorce. And you can leave right now. I love my son very much and I'll never leave him. You see, we're not on the same path. We're too different. Stop torturing each other, said Samuel Smith. The woman even cheered up, as if she had wanted to hear these words for a long time, and replied happily. Well, that's fine. I won't be lost. I have an admirer, but goodbye, Smith. Everyone has their own life now. I'm free at last. From that day on, Samuel fell on hard times. He was literally torn between work and his young son. He had to hire a suitable nanny, and still he couldn't get anything done. That's when Samuel remembered about that sad cleaning lady from the restaurant and decided to persuade the girl to work for him. However, what he learned shocked him. After that unpleasant incident in the restaurant with the theft of brochettes, everything seemed to calm down. Anne continued to work hard and moved into a house in the suburbs. How happy she was. Some kind of a separate corner. The girl tidied up the wardrobe, found bed linen, old dusty curtains, a tablecloth. She wiped it all up, made it cozy, and began to settle in. She was not frightened by the lack of comfort. She was used to walking to the end of the street, to the well, to fetch water, to stoke the cooker. It seemed to her that her life was slowly getting better. But at work, the administrator is obnoxious, Mr. William completely furious at her, all looking for flaws in her work, forced to rewash everything. Then one day he brought a rickety stepladder and commanded, "Look how dirty the windows are. This is no good. Get up there at once and wash everything. It's a decent place. Everything must be clean." She was a bit scared. The ceilings are high. She was afraid of heights. But there was nothing to do. She didn't dare to disobey and climbed up with difficulty, taking her equipment with her. She tried to turn round and round to reach the edge of the window. Suddenly, the ladder literally folded under her and Anne flew down. A hellish pain in her back literally pierced her. The staff ran to the scream, tried to lift the poor girl, and called ambulance. The girl was immediately taken to the hospital, x-rayed, and came to a disappointing conclusion. She had a serious spinal injury, requiring surgical intervention. The many tissues began to die off. She couldn't even stand for a few minutes. She became depressed, completely lost heart, and did not understand why she had to go through all this again. It was like she was being haunted by an evil fate. She had an operation under the policy, but it did not give the results she had hoped for. Our doctors were dismissive and hinted that she might not be able to walk at all. No one visited her, and the days were gray and monotonous. She lay there for days on end, her back turned to the wall, crying silently. Suddenly, the door to the ward opened, and a familiar voice called out to her. "Anne, hello. This is Detective Inspector Smith. I just came into the restaurant to see how you were, and I have had such unpleasant news." "How could it be? What did the doctor say?" To the girl, sobbing, replied, "Hello, Samuel. The receptionist made me clean the windows, and the ladder was wobbly, so I fell. The keys to your house are in my purse. I won't be needing them anymore. I'm a worthless invalid now. They'll probably take me to a hospice where I'll live out my life. The doctors can't do anything, and there's no reason for me to live. I want to die there, in heaven. I'll be alone with my mom. They say there's no pain and no fear there. What good things have I seen here? Even in the hospital, they treat me like a useless thing who needs a bum with no papers. They won't even take the duck out. I've been putting up with it all day." Samuel felt unbearably sorry for the poor girl, and then he remembered Maloney and suggested it. "Look, don't despair yet. There's a witch doctor in the village. They say she can work miracles, and let me take you to her. And you can use the word you. It's worth a try. What if it helps?" She waved her hand and said, "It's no use. Take me wherever you want, even into the woods with bears. Only I know it's no use." Samuel made arrangements with the doctors and took Anne away. He's taken Anthony too. You can't leave your son alone. So they set off. The baby kept waking Anne up and talking, asking where it hurt. He made her laugh. The girl herself did not notice how she talked and distracted a little from sad thoughts. And then Anthony fell asleep, snuggled against Anne. She felt so good for some reason. Maloney took her in without a word and told her to go to the baths. And Samuel introduced his son to Mummy. "Here, Mummy, this is your grandson Anthony. Isn't he a great kid I've got growing up? Son, this is your Grandma Linda. You two get to know each other, and I'll go help. Maloney's got the bathhouse fired up and she's working some magic. Do you think she'll help Anne, Mum? Poor girl, she's been through so much. She's been through so much. I feel sorry for her. I want her to get back on her feet." Linda said, "I believe Maloney. She got me back from the dead, and she'll help Anne. You'll see. Do you love her?" "Yes. Otherwise I wouldn't have traveled all this way for a stranger I don't know. It's too early to tell. But there's something about her. I can't even explain it." After the examination, Maloney reassured him that there was a chance of getting back on her feet and left Anne with her, told her to come back in a couple of weeks. Samuel went home with his son and decided to seek justice and compensation for the girl's injury. But it didn't turn out to be that easy. The cunning administrator and the director tried to pretend that we did not have such a cleaner. She was not listed. The investigator was very angry, raised such a fuss. The restaurant was subjected to inspections on all fronts, from the tax office to the fire inspectorate. Of course, massive violations were discovered. The restaurant was temporarily shut down. Now Mr. Anthony was begging the police, seeking a meeting with an investigator. "We're sorry, but it's really not nice. Anne was hurt because the ladder was broken. I'm prepared to compensate for her medical treatment and pay her a large sum of money. Just stop terrorizing us. The inspectors are descending on us. There's no escape. We're going bankrupt. I'm sorry about Anne. I got her a job as a cleaner myself. I felt sorry for her. I wish her a speedy recovery. What I don't understand is she a friend of yours? Do you care about her so much? If so, I'm sorry again, I didn't know." Samuel's angry. "What if she isn't? If she's just an ordinary person in trouble, then I don't care about her, do I? That's your reasoning. Who framed Anne? Did you find out who planted that brooch in her bag then?" The director was embarrassed. "Well, I've spoken to the staff, of course, off the record. Many people think that only my manager could have harmed her. He didn't like her, no matter how much he disliked her. He tried to survive by any means necessary, and he made her climb the stepladder. The waitress heard her." The coroner was surprised. "What did you do after that? Fired the receptionist or helped Anne?" "No, you continue to deny it as if nothing happened. I don't understand you as a manager." Mr. Anthony lowered his head and explained. "Well, in good conscience, you're right. I should have sacked William. But I couldn't. He's not only my administrator, but he's also my sister's husband. How could I leave him out of a job? It's family." Samuel replied sharply. "I've talked to your staff too. A lot of people are complaining about the administrator. Do you know that he's been taking tips from the waiters, that he's been doing it with impunity? Well, if you don't want to do the right thing, I'll make you do it. You will fire Mr. William today and pay Anne compensation. And then maybe the inspections will stop. That is, of course, if you correct the violations you've already found. Is that clear? Have a good day. I have a lot to do." An unpleasant conversation took place in the principal's office. Mr. Anthony got up the nerve to fire the administrator. He was furious, shouting at the top of his lungs. "Oh, that's how it is. So they're the reason for all the fuss. So you give her that much money for nothing, and you fire me. I'll teach you a lesson. If you want to know, I lived with your sister only because the place was profitable. I've had enough of her for a long time. Fatty. If you sack me, I'll leave your sister." Mr. Anthony only now realized who he'd taken in. What a despicable, worthless, dishonest man William had turned out to be. He was practically blackmailing him. But the headmaster had no choice. He couldn't afford to have the restaurant shut down because of all this. So he said firmly, "Do whatever you want. You've got a lot of nerve. You don't appreciate what you have. I gave you and Emma a house. I sent you and Emma to holiday resorts every summer. And what did you do? You're making a mess in the restaurant. Get out of here. And don't let me see you again." William hissed and said, "Wait a minute. I've got more tricks up my sleeve. It's going to be a big one. I'll wipe you out." Samuel was pleased when the director paid the compensation. He decided to help Anne get her passport restored and brought the passport officer straight to the village. She had to thank her, of course, but now she would no longer be wandering around without documents. She couldn't believe this was happening to her. "Samuel, you're a miracle worker. I've never met anyone like you before, I swear. I've always been kicked and chased and dismissed. I've accepted that I'm worthless, that my life was a waste. All I prayed for was death. I did, and you. You just like that, you helped me out. And you've done so much good for me. Tell me why. Why did you give up on me? A poor tramp. You're a handsome, good-looking man with such a brave profession. You have a wife, a son. Why are you helping me? I just can't believe it." The man shrugged. "I don't know the answer to your questions, Anne. At first, I really only felt sorry for you. I think anyone can get into trouble, and no one is immune to it. And then I don't know what happened to me. I can't forget your gray eyes. They've got a hold on my soul. Believe it or not. I want you to believe in yourself again. Don't ever call yourself a tramp again. You're a beautiful young girl with your whole life ahead of you. And I'm divorced, and I really need a woman in the house. I don't have anyone to leave my son with, but I need not only a nanny, but a companion, a friend, a favorite woman, and my son's mother. I'd like you to be that person. Anne, think about what I'm saying. I'm in no hurry, and you need to get on your feet first. That's the most important thing for now, and then we'll come back to this conversation later." The girl was incredibly pleased with such a confession. Her heart was ready to jump out of her chest, because she herself had fallen in love with this investigator at first sight back then, in the restaurant. She really never met such men, but she dared not look in his direction. And then he actually admitted that he was in love. But is it ever like that? Anne even blushed. She was afraid that now, as in a fairy tale about Cinderella, open her eyes and instead of a carriage, a pumpkin, and the prince's knot. So she answered quickly, "There's nothing to think about, Samuel. I'll do it. I don't just want to live, I want to fly. I want to shout to the whole world that I am happy, and I will definitely stand on my feet and become your best wife. You won't regret choosing me. I'll love you dearly for the rest of my life. Do you believe that?" Anne's body really shook up. It's true what they say, believing in your own strength is half the battle. She persevered with Maloney's recommendations. She gave her painful massages, drank bitter potions, and talked to her a lot about everything, giving her the opportunity to spill out all her resentments and sorrows. In this way, her body and soul were restored. She was visited on weekends. Now Samuel and his son came to visit Anne, his mother and healer, all the time. Samuel enjoyed spending time with Anne, taking her out on the bench in the yard. They talked and laughed a lot. Anthony made everyone laugh too. What a good time the three of them were having. Linda was happy for her son and prayed that Samuel and Anne would have a strong family. Samuel didn't know what was happening to him. How, when? At what point had he fallen so in love with Anne? So much so that he couldn't live without her. So one day he asked Maloney, "Tell me, is she the one? Is Anne my destiny? Did you talk about her at the time? It's incredible, but how could you know that beforehand? You do have a powerful gift." The healer only grinned. "And you listen to your heart, my boy. You'll know if it's her or not. I have a gift or a curse. I still don't know, even though I've lived for a century. I seem to be doing a good deed, getting people back on their feet. They often thank me, wish me well. But the payback for looking into the future is cruel. I have no husband or children in my life." Maloney lived alone. "When I was young, I cried I was angry, but then I accepted it. That's how I live. She'll be all right soon. Your friend can feel her leg up to her knee. She can wiggle her toes. So you'll have time to get married and raise your children. You're destined to be together. That's how I see it. You're good, my dear, for forgiving your mother. She's blossomed. Her soul has been cured of shame and longing. She's made herself a recluse. But I see how her eyes light up every time you come. how she wants to come home. She's just afraid to admit it to herself. She's still very ashamed. She doesn't want to be a burden to you. She often thinks of her husband. She wants to apologize, but she's afraid to show her face. Samuel was so pleased. He dreamed of persuading his mother to come back, but he remembered what she said and asked, "To Maloney, I've asked Mom to come back, but she won't go back. She said she wouldn't betray you or leave you. You saved her life, and she's also worried about how you'll be alone." Melanie replied quietly, "That's all nonsense. I'm not afraid of loneliness. It doesn't scare me. I'm used to Linda, of course. We've grown very close over the years, but I know in my heart it's not her destiny to live in the middle of nowhere with me." So Samuel decided to do things his own way. When Anne was almost well enough to be taken away, he begged his mother, "Mummy, darling, please help me. You see, Anne is still weak. She can hardly walk with a stick. Anthony's little. You can't leave him alone. And I've got work to do. You know how busy I am. I'm nervous all the time. I mean, having a nanny is not an option, and it's expensive. I'm asking you to stay with me for a while until Anne can run like she used to. Look after your grandson and then come back and I'll take you back to Maloney's if you want." Linda's insides turned upside down and tears sprang to her eyes. God, how she had waited for those words. How she wanted to be a part of her son's family again. "My son Samuel, have you really forgiven me? And will you call me back to your house? Thank you. I never dared hope for such a thing. But what about Melanie? I owe her my life too." She looked guiltily at Melanie, and she said sternly, "It's your destiny, don't resist. Now, go. Don't worry about me. I'll live as long as God gives me. And you come to visit, I'll be glad to. God's will be done. Goodbye. Goodbye." They all moved into Samuel's flat together. Linda enjoyed baking pies and making borscht. And together with Anne they entertained Anthony, and with what pride Linda walked with her grandson. The little boy held her hand and chattered away. She bought him candy and ice cream, hugged him, and imagined that it was little Samuel, and tried to give this little man all the love and affection that she had not given to her son. Now Samuel was completely calm for Anthony, because he was being looked after by his family and close people who loved him very much. Daniel walked into his office, which had become his home after so many years of working at the hospital. He always felt at home here. Tall shelves along the walls were filled with folders and books. A desk littered with papers rotating. A comfortable armchair, once presented by colleagues on the anniversary. Everything in the office was familiar, calming, and even cozy. Daniel had to spend days at a time here, even overnight. He had a couch in the corner for those occasions. Normally it was piled high with folders and papers, but in the conditions of time pressure they were stacked on the windowsill, and the couch turned into a bed on which you could sleep at least a couple of hours. And the time pressure was not uncommon. Yes, Daniel's work was hard, but interesting, and also incredibly necessary. The man loved his work. Now he was already the head of the neurosurgery department at the regional children's hospital. But he started out as a common surgeon. Daniel remembered the first operation he performed on his own. His heart clenched and his hands were shaking in front of the operating room. He, then a young doctor who had just finished his residency, was afraid to do something wrong. And his hands were also shaking. It seemed then that 7 long years of training had been for nothing. He wouldn't be able to operate. Not the right character. Probably a coward. But in the operating room, the excitement was gone. In front of Daniel lay a patient with whom the anesthesiologist had already worked. An 8-year-old boy who'd been in a car accident with his parents. The adults had scratches, but the kid had a severe head injury. Right now he had a hematoma growing in his head, which, if it is not removed now, will lead to catastrophic consequences, and only he, Daniel, could help the little patient. The young surgeon had the feeling that he knew exactly what to do. Daniel no longer felt anxious. Point by point, a plan of action took shape. The team was waiting for his orders. The boy nodded his head and they began. They worked harmoniously, like a single organism. Everything then went like a textbook. The boy recovered quickly after the operation. Daniel then watched with a smile on his face as the little patient scurried around the hospital corridors with other children. The child had a long, happy life ahead of him. He had so much ahead of him, and it might not have been. It's scary to imagine. Daniel often wondered what if that first time had been a failure. It's not always up to the doctors. Now Daniel had a lot of experience, and he knew for sure. Sometimes seemingly hopeless patients recover, and people with minor illnesses, on the contrary, die. Why this happens is an open question. Perhaps the higher powers have their own plans for each person. What if the boy, the young surgeon's first patient, had not survived? Would Daniel have stayed in surgery then? Probably not. It would have been too big and too serious a blow for him. But I guess fate had it differently. The boy was destined to become a surgeon. Daniel quickly became known as a talented young surgeon. It was flattering, of course, but much more gratifying was the sincere gratitude of recovering young patients and their parents. Looking into these happy eyes, Daniel realized that he did not live in this world for nothing. At such moments, he felt warm and light at heart. Of course, tragedies also happened. Daniel could often foresee the outcome in advance. Each time it knocked him out of his element. But Daniel was well aware that he had done everything he could. The young surgeon preferred to give patients a chance even when other doctors refused them. He took on the most difficult and seemingly hopeless cases. Sometimes he was able to help people. Sometimes, unfortunately, not. But for each of his little patients, Daniel fought to the last, so that he would not be tormented by the annoying, guilt-ridden thought that not all resources had been utilized. Daniel didn't remember every one of his patients, but some of the guys stayed in his memory for some reason. They weren't always some particularly difficult or interesting cases. No, everything was determined more by some personal feelings between doctor and patient during treatment. For example, Daniel always remembered Rebecca. The girl was brought to the hospital from the neighborhood. She was only about 7 years old at the time. Daniel vividly remembered the moment when he first saw her. It was during morning rounds the day after her hospitalization. The patient was in serious condition. The man realized it immediately, even before he saw her ID. Skinny, pale, with bruises under her huge gray eyes. Her arms were as thin as 2 twigs lying on the blanket. Daniel noted the pearlescent polish on the tiny fingernails and smiled to himself. It means that the patient is determined to live and fight if she cares about her appearance, even in this situation. The girl looked at the doctor with a curious look. She was in an extremely serious condition, and still in her eyes burned a lively and very bright light. "Hello, Rebecca," Daniel said with a smile as he looked at the patient's chart. "What a name. It's a wonderful name, Hope. And it suits this girl just fine. Children are rarely called that nowadays. It's a shame. Good morning." The little girl said hello politely. Her voice is weak, her tongue is a little slurred. The tumor had already affected the speech center. Daniel knew the girl's story briefly. She lived with her parents and younger siblings in a small town. Simple family, not wealthy. 6 months ago, she started complaining of dizziness. Then her mother and father didn't pay much attention to it. They put it all down to the increased workload because Rebecca went to school in September. They thought it was a peculiarity of adaptation. But after a couple of weeks, the girl's condition began to deteriorate. She developed strabismus, her legs began to cramp. Rebecca, who used to be a good student, slipped to poor grades. The parents took the child to the city hospital to see a doctor. Daniel was well aware of the level of medicine in provincial towns: no equipment, no drugs, no decent laboratories. There, Rebecca only lost precious time. The girl was given one diagnosis after another: anemia and genetic disease. In the end, it turned out to be a tumor in the brain and rapidly progressing. The tumor was noticed when it grew to a huge size. By that time, Rebecca could not walk and rarely smiled, although she had been a cheerful child before. But the girl's thirst for life and curiosity had not been lost. Unlike the doctors in the town, the little girl did not even doubt that she would be fine. She and Daniel at the first meeting confidently said that as soon as she recovered, her parents would take her to the sea. She had never seen the sea. That's why she asked Daniel to cure her as soon as possible, so that she could finally go on a trip. Daniel realized, of course, that Rebecca's case was very complicated. The tumor is large, and it's putting pressure on all parts of the brain. Rebecca must be experiencing severe headaches, and if she's not operated on immediately, she'll never see the sea. We can't let that happen. A child longs to walk on the beach, enjoy the warm waves, breathe in the salty, fresh air. Before taking the patient to the operating table, Daniel had to examine her completely. He preferred to know in advance who he was dealing with. It took several days to prepare for the surgery. During this time, Daniel and Rebecca talked every day and became real friends. The man rushed to Rebecca's room every morning, specially arranging his schedule to have a chat with a cheerful patient. The girl was alone in the ward. She was very sociable. Despite her condition, she lacked companions. Daniel tried to keep her company. "I had a dream today," Rebecca shared with her favorite doctor. "I was swimming with dolphins. You know, his back is smooth, 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 smooth. I'm holding onto his fin, and he's smiling. In my dream, it took my breath away, thinking that soon I'll see the sea. I'll see dolphins there, won't I?" Yes, Daniel nodded. He thought to himself that he would do everything possible to make Rebecca's dream come true. The whole staff loved the girl. How could they not? She was so sincere, open, and very courageously bore the misfortune that fell on her. She obediently took bitter pills and endured pain. Long, not always pleasant diagnostic procedures without a single squeak withstood. Even older children were frightened and cried. But this one behaved like a real hero. She was interested in everything. How do you tell by blood what's wrong with a person? How do you know what's wrong with a person? Why do you have that thing around your neck? $100,000, I think. How do you do surgery on the head? The skull is hard there, Rebecca literally pelted Daniel with questions. Daniel tried to answer each one. He had to choose his words carefully, building a narrative so that the 7-year-old understood. Rebecca greedily caught every word. Her gray eyes burned with genuine curiosity. Daniel's heart sank at the sight of this little thing. Not walking, not even sitting up. A weak voice, a skinny body. What keeps her soul alive? And how much energy, how much curiosity. Incredible girl. One of Rebecca's questions took Daniel by surprise. "Why did you decide to become a doctor? How did you come up with that?" The man smiled confusedly. Rebecca, without realizing it, brought him back to the past. The hardest, scariest period of his life. Daniel was 14 at the time, and his brother Hugo was 7. The youngest had just started first grade. Just like Rebecca, Daniel adored his little brother. But it wasn't love at first sight. At first, he was jealous of his parents for the baby, which they had brought from the hospital for some reason. The boy then sincerely did not understand his mother and father already have one son. Why did they need someone else? After all, he was a wonderful child, studied perfectly, cleaned his room, obeyed his parents. So why do they need this small creature, gathering all the attention and strength? It pained Daniel to see his mother smile at Hugo's every gesture. Oh, he smiled. "Look, honey," Hugo rolled over on his tummy. Hugo is already holding a rattle in his hand. "How great is that?" Daniel only wrinkled his nose at these enthusiastic exclamations. What's the big deal? So what if he holds a toy, Daniel thought. I won first place in the school relay race, the fastest runner. My parents didn't praise me like that. Daniel shunned his brother. He hated even seeing his tiny face, where his mother could stare at him with a smile for hours. The baby's cries irritated the boy to the core. Daniel, who always liked to spend time in his cozy room with books, even began to walk more. It was better to run around the yard with the boys than to listen to the cries of his newborn brother. It seemed to Daniel then that Hugo had taken away his former happy life, his parents' attention, everything. And then Hugo grew up, and somehow everything changed. Maybe it was the look in his little brother's eyes. As the boy grew older, he began to look at Daniel as if he were a deity. His eyes were full of trust and admiration. Daniel tried to ignore it at first, and then Hugo got upset when his tower of cubes fell apart. And Daniel immediately corrected the situation. He didn't do it out of pity or love for his brother. He just didn't want to hear him cry. Your baby boy threw that look at him again. Daniel even squared his shoulders at him. Hugo clearly thought his older brother was omnipotent. Something had changed since then. Daniel had taken a serious interest in his brother. It turned out that it was great to play with the baby, to help him learn about the world, and at the same time feel strong, smart, and serious. Hugo followed his older brother with his tail, tried to imitate him in everything. And he did not mind. Now he was pleased with such attention. Daniel genuinely liked Hugo. He felt needed and important with him. Hugo had grown up, no longer a frightened little boy. He had become a sharp boy, a lover of backyard soccer, a leader of boy scrimmages, a conqueror of fences and roofs. Daniel was proud of his brother. That's how he turned out to be a lucky, agile, energetic leader among the local kids. Daniel himself had never been like that. Trouble came when he wasn't expecting it. It happened in September, just after Hugo became a first-grade student. His brother didn't like to read and write, but he showed all his talents in physical education. He was even selected for the local basketball team. Daniel knew that to get there, you had to pass a tough selection process, and Hugo handled it with flying colors. It was something to be proud of. "You know, they gave me a uniform." Hugo's eyes shining with excitement, he flew into Daniel's room, clutching a pile of red and white clothes, the coveted uniform. Daniel's heart fluttered with excitement then. Many of his friends wanted to join the team, even specially trained, and no one succeeded. But Hugo was taken right away in the first grade. Handsome. Daniel clapped his brother on the shoulder. He tried to keep his voice low, not to show too much emotion. He was a grown-up, 14 years old. At the end of September, Hugo was already taken to an away competition, although he trained for a short time, but the coach knows better. So the little brother had time to prove himself. His mother didn't want to let him go, as if she sensed something. The father also thought the younger son was too young, but in the end the parents gave in under the pressure of Hugo and his persuasions, which they later regretted more than once. The bus with athletes got into an accident on the highway. Hugo wasn't wearing his seatbelt. He must have buckled up first. The movement did not start until the coach made sure that everyone on the team was seated properly. He was very strict about safety. But then, apparently, the mischievous little brother unbuckled his belt to spin freely in all directions. You have to talk to everyone. That's what Hugo's all about. The accident wasn't too serious. Most of the passengers were only slightly hurt, but Hugo wasn't so lucky. The unbuckled boy flew out of his seat and hit his head hard against the wall. It was said that Hugo didn't even feel a thing. He went straight into a coma. He was taken to the nearest hospital, hooked up to some clever apparatus. The fight for Hugo's life began. Daniel remembered those days well. His parents walked around pale, silent. Mom cried often and constantly called the hospital to see how her son was doing. Daniel wanted to visit his brother, but only his mother or father were allowed in the room, and that was bypassing the rules. He realized that Hugo had been unlucky. The boy had suffered a very serious head injury and was therefore unconscious. Hugo had undergone several surgeries. Each time, Daniel hoped that everything would be all right now. The surgeons seemed to him almost like gods in white coats. But as time went on, Hugo never regained consciousness. Sometimes Daniel heard his parents discussing the situation. His father said in a colorless voice that he should prepare for the worst. His mother, on the other hand, countered, assuring him that everything would be fine. Daniel had so much hope for the doctors. The doctors seemed very smart, serious, almost omnipotent. These people would help Hugo. They would save him. They didn't. That day, my parents didn't come home from the hospital for a long time. And when finally his father almost brought his mother into the apartment, Daniel knew immediately. His parents had obviously both just cried. Mom's eyes were kind of scary. That could only mean one thing: Hugo was gone. It was hard to get used to, much harder than adjusting to his arrival 7 years ago when his parents had changed so much. His father was hardly ever home now, disappearing to work and then going out with friends. He came home drunk, aggressive. The mother stopped noticing anything around her. She no longer cooked delicious lunches and dinners for the family, was not interested in Daniel's success at school. She didn't even watch her favorite TV shows. His mother lived as if she were a machine, serving some heavy duty. Daniel felt almost physical pain at not being able to talk to his brother, to look into his curious blue eyes. He wanted to talk about it with someone, but his friends wouldn't understand, that was for sure. His father was always away somewhere, and his mother never noticed anything, so he had to deal with it himself. At first, Daniel was angry at the doctors. Why hadn't they saved his brother? All those years of study, and they couldn't cure the boy. Perhaps Hugo was just unlucky to fall into the hands of these inept doctors. If there had been another doctor, a normal one, he would have saved Hugo. The anger in the teenager's heart was growing, gaining strength. Why should his whole family suffer so much because of some lazy and inept doctor? One day Daniel couldn't stand it any longer. He went to the hospital. He went to the surgeon who operated on his brother. The guy himself did not know what exactly he needed from this man, but his soul demanded action. The teenager flew into the office on the second floor and saw in front of him a tired old man with eyes red from lack of sleep. "What do you want, young man?" he asked him politely. Daniel told him everything, without hesitation. He told him about his pain and his anger. The boy thought that the doctor would kick him out of the office at the beginning of his fiery tirade. But this man listened without interrupting, looked at the visitor with attentive and very sad eyes. Of course I remember Hugo. He had a bad case. His brain was badly damaged. We did everything we could. We fought for young life to the last, and the doctor began to explain to the 14-year-old the details of Hugo's condition, telling him something about the structure of the human brain. Daniel listened with his mouth open. Now he understood a lot of things. Hugo had had almost no chance at first, unlucky in the fall. But the doctors had fought for him anyway, operating, watching, supporting him. The doctor even showed Daniel pictures of Hugo and other patients, so that the boy realized everything, saw everything for himself. And the teenager listened, asked questions. Now he knew and understood a lot of things. It was after that conversation with the doctor that the boy decided that he would definitely become a surgeon, perform brain surgeries and save people. And of course, Daniel will invent a means or method to help even such difficult patients as Hugo. Now Daniel was reading a lot again books on anatomy. The new world attracted him, drew him in more and more. His parents were not particularly supportive of their son's hobby. They didn't seem to notice Daniel at all. Each was immersed in his own emotions, and each saved himself in his own way. The father went into a world of fun. Now he drank often, he had new friends. Daniel understood that in noisy companies, his parent tried to hide from the grief that fell on their family. But nothing worked, because the morning with a hangover came the realization of irreparable misfortune. The mother became indifferent from the resolved tragedy. She experienced everything inside, sometimes crying, sometimes snapping at Daniel because of some trifle. The teenager did not snap back, he understood everything. It would seem that having lost one son, mother and father should have focused all their attention on the remaining one, but both suddenly became completely indifferent to Daniel. He himself enrolled in courses at the medical university, himself learned the conditions of admission to the capital's medical academy, beat out a hostel, looking for tutors. Everything worked out for Daniel. He entered, moved to New York, began to study, then to work. His parents seemed pleased with his success, but both still hadn't gotten over their grief. Even years later, nothing had changed in that regard. Almost nothing. Daniel had tried to get his parents to see a good therapist. Now that he had connections in the medical world, he knew exactly who would help his mother and father. But they refused and said there was nothing wrong with them. "You can't take them to Nicholas. It's a voluntary thing." Daniel didn't tell little Rebecca any of this, of course. But she waited for an answer to her question, wondering why Daniel had chosen to become a doctor. "But I really wanted to help little children," the man finally said. "That was partly true. Like you, I want you to run and jump again." "You like to go crazy, don't you?" Daniel asked. Rebecca smiled. "You bet I do. When will I be able to walk? The first thing I'm going to do is have a big frenzy of yelling, jumping, and catching up." "That's a great plan." Daniel approved. "Just don't forget to invite me." Daniel promised Rebecca she'd be fine. What else could he say when she asked directly? But the truth was, she was in a bad place. Very bad. The outlook was pretty dim. To the girl's parents, Daniel had told the truth, explained that anything could happen. They should be aware of all the risks when they signed the consent for the operation. They listened to the predictions about their daughter's condition calmly. No tears, no hysterics, no threats, no aggression. It happens to parents of difficult patients. And Daniel understands those mothers and fathers. He stormed into a doctor's office years ago in a rage. People who lose or have lost a loved one always want to blame someone. But Rebecca's parents were holding up well. You could see that they were in pain, scared, worried, but they also believed in good things. Very much so. They're nice young people, simple, handsome, clearly adoring their eldest daughter. You see, things can go wrong on the operating table, Daniel warned. It's a big tumor. It's affecting many parts of the brain. It's a big risk. But if we don't operate soon, Rebecca doesn't stand a chance. We agree, said the girl's father, squeezing his wife's hand. She nodded. Everyone except you has refused the operation. At least you'll have a chance. I'll do everything I can, Daniel promised. And he did do everything he could. He gave it his all. However, as always, the man was a little worried that his personal feelings for the girl would somehow interfere with the operation. But no, in the operating room he again turned into a surgeon, focused solely on the problem. The tumor was even bigger than it looked on the scans. Or it had grown even bigger in the 24 hours before surgery. Daniel worked carefully, taking care not to touch healthy parts of the brain. Difficult tasks always mobilized him, pulled him up. That's what happened this time. Rebecca's tumor was a challenge for Daniel, and he rose to the challenge. He removed the tumor without a trace, masterfully bypassing all the difficult areas. He did everything he could. Now all that was left to do was wait. Rebecca would definitely live. But what kind of life? Did the operation damage any parts of the brain, or disrupt any important functions? That would be clear once the girl was out of anesthesia. The night after the operation, Daniel stayed on duty. First, he spent a few hours sorting out paperwork. Then he lay down on the couch to get some rest. He was awakened by a cautious knock on the door. Rebecca's awake, the nurse said. You told me to tell you right away. So I did. Thank you, Daniel nodded. He tried to stay calm, though his heart was pounding in his chest like a trapped bird. I'll be right there. The man tried hard not to run, just to walk with a wide, sweeping stride. What would he see now? On the bed was the same Rebecca as before the operation. Daniel recognized her immediately in those curious looks and exhaled a sigh of relief. Brain surgery often changes people beyond recognition, and some are even profoundly disabled. There's nothing wrong with the girl's personality. You can see it in the look in her eyes. Daniel smiled at Rebecca with his eyes wide open. The girl certainly didn't look like much. Her head bandaged, half her face bruised under her eyes, her lips dry, her neck cut off. It's a good thing her parents can't see her like that right now. But it was all temporary. Danielle knew that as well as anyone. In a couple days, Rebecca's cheeks would turn pink, the bruises would fade. Her skinny arms and legs would be strong. Well, kid, you're a real hero, Daniel said with a smile, sitting down on the edge of her bed. No, you're the hero, quietly and hoarsely replied the girl. You saved me. I know, they told me. Daniel grinned and stroked her hand. Then he asked the usual questions. Did she have a headache? Were her eyes watering? Rebecca answered, her tongue no longer slurred. Rebecca was still very weak, but it was only temporary. Daniel imagined telling her parents in the morning that their little girl would be fine now. He didn't dare disturb them now at night. Night calls from the hospital could be immediately taken as a bad sign. The man didn't want the parents to think for even a brief moment that the worst had happened to their little girl. Rebecca was indeed on the mend. She grew stronger by leaps and bounds. Only 3 days after the operation, the girl was already standing up. How happy she was to be able to move again. Rebecca had to spend several months in bed. And now the freedom of movement is available again. Isn't it a miracle? Shared her joy with Daniel. I can run, jump, dance. And when my mom and dad take me to the sea, I will learn to swim there and maybe even swim with a dolphin, like in my dream. Remember? I didn't tell you. I dreamt about a dolphin then too. During the anesthesia, I wasn't even the least bit scared with him. That's the gas. Daniel rejoiced. Be careful though. Don't run fast. You can't do that yet. No way, the girl argued. Your corridors are so long and wide. It's like they're made for running. And Rebecca did. She made friends with the kids from the other wards, became their little leader. Daniel gave her a little scolding, just to be on the safe side. It was actually good for Rebecca, moderate exercise. It made her heal faster. After the operation, Rebecca needed to develop her fingers. The usual children's activities, such as molding, making crafts, and appliques were perfect for this. When Daniel told her parents about it, they immediately bought her daughter different materials: cardboard, scissors, plasticine, glue, and paints. Now Rebecca was creating a lot. Passing by her room, Daniel often caught her creating another masterpiece she began to draw. Every day she got better and better at it. Rebecca's fine motor skills were improving by leaps and bounds. Daniel couldn't get enough of her. This child had a minimal chance of living, much less a full life. All the doctors had given up on her. But he took a chance. And what was the result? Rebecca will live, grow up, have children of her own. It's a miracle. Such cases gave Daniel the strength to continue working and to endure failures, which although not often but still happened in his practice. Some patients were impossible to help. Daniel took each loss to heart, even though it was unprofessional. So stories similar to Rebecca's sustained, encouraged, and inspired him. Rebecca's discharge was approaching. It was May, and the lilacs and cherry bloomed in the hospital garden. Daniel tried to keep the windows open to enjoy the pleasant scent of the delicate spring flowers. That morning, 3 people entered his office for a discharge, a radiant man and woman, and Rebecca. The girl looked a little sad. "I'm going to miss you," she said, glancing at her doctor. "We have been such friends, and now we have to part. It's sad." "I'll miss you," too, Daniel admitted. Rebecca's words touched him, filled his heart with warmth. "But it's better if you don't go to doctors too much in the future." "Doctors are the best people," Rebecca said fervently. Daniel smiled. Then his attention turned to the girl's parents. He explained to them what to do next, how to rehabilitate their daughter, when to have her examined, just in case. Rebecca's father listened attentively, and her mother wrote everything down in a notebook. The girl herself was looking around curiously. It was the first time she was in a doctor's office. She was especially interested in the anatomical posters on the walls. "Let's say goodbye," Daniel smiled as he finished talking to the parents of the little patient. "Oh, I have a present for you." The girl realized and took out a small cardboard box from her purse, glued with shiny foil and decorated with tiny roses made of red paper. "What a beauty," Daniel marveled. He was really impressed with the creation he had found. Rebecca's fine motor skills were excellent. Not everyone could build such a masterpiece. It's amazing how quickly she recovered. "I made it for you," Rebecca admitted. "It took me 3 hours. Do you like it?" Daniel nodded very seriously. "This box will have a place of honor in my collection. Look at it." With these words, the man walked over to the shelves by the window. There, on the top shelf, he had his own museum. Rebecca was not the first little patient to thank the doctor with a gift made with her own hands. Daniel was good with children, so he already had a whole collection. The man did not throw away the children's creations. He kept them carefully. The little patients tried so hard to please him. These cute things had a special energy. Daniel placed Rebecca's box in the center of the room. "Wow, what talented children you have here," Rebecca said with sincere admiration. Danielle smiled. This girl saw the beauty in everything and at her age could not envy the skills of others, but admire them. Amazing person. "Well, good luck to you." Daniel smiled goodbye. "We'll see each other again sometime," Rebecca promised. "Better not," Danielle said as the door closed behind the girl. If they saw each other again, it would mean only one thing: the disease had returned. And Daniel didn't want that to happen. But he and Rebecca had met. And it was under the strangest of circumstances. Years ago, looking at the skinny girl with pigtails, Daniel had never imagined how fate would bring them together again. Now the man found the small box with his eyes. The one Rebecca had given him as a parting gift. There it was, all shiny and bright. The man had stared at it many times, remembering his little patient, but he had never once thought to look inside the box. It had never even occurred to him. Now he intended to do so as soon as possible. It's been 20 years since Rebecca was discharged. A lot had happened in Daniel's life in that time, both good and bad. The man lost both of his parents in the same year. His father died of cheap alcohol poisoning. He'd completely collapsed by then. Whether or not his mother helped him keep his humanity somehow. Daniel tried many times to treat his parent, put him in the hospital. It was all in vain. Doctors are powerless if the patient doesn't want to get better. And his mother had a heart attack shortly after her husband's funeral. Daniel realized that both parents had not coped with the loss. Neither had been able to move on with their lives, and he himself had not helped them. Daniel himself believed it was his job that pulled him through. Every child's life he saved, he mentally dedicated to his brother Hugo. That must have been why the confidence lived in the man. Hugo hadn't lived long, but he hadn't come into this world for nothing. Thanks to what had happened to his brother, Daniel had entered the profession and was now treating children. This thought was very supportive to the man. His father and mother had no such support. Daniel felt the loss of his parents very hard, even if they did not communicate much. But the man always knew there are people who love him, always waiting for him, proud of him. To remain suddenly completely alone in this world. A grown man was not ready for this. During this difficult period in Daniel's life, Carolyn appeared. They met by chance. They were in the same company at the anniversary of Daniel's colleague. The celebration was held in a restaurant. Luxuriously served tables, live music, dressed-up guests, light, pleasant atmosphere. Daniel immediately noticed her, a tall, slender young woman with sad eyes. She sat in the far corner of the long table and looked. It was hard to describe, a look that couldn't leave Daniel indifferent. Long, wavy hair, thin hands with graceful fingers, high cheekbones, and for some reason sad eyes. He wanted to unravel the mystery of this silent beauty. What is she sad about, and why is she sad? Somehow he was immediately drawn to her. Gaining courage, Daniel asked the girl to dance. So Carolyn said yes. She even seemed pleased. It was during this dance that they met. The girl's name was Carolyn. She was a cousin of the Jubilee, Daniel's colleague. The young beauty worked as a labor economist for a large oil company. She also liked the same movies as Daniel and listened to the same bands as he did. They turned out to have a lot in common. A love of traveling, a love of classical music, a desire to live somewhere in the country. Anyway, Daniel and Carolyn left the restaurant together. They wandered around the city, sat in cafes, wandered into nightclubs and talked. They got to know each other more and more. Soon they both realized they couldn't live without each other anymore. Daniel never thought that he would have such a person, understanding, sensitive, loving. Someone who could detect the slightest change in his mood, who knew how to cheer him up in any situation. Happiness in the form of Carolyn had come upon him quite unexpectedly. Just holding Carolyn's hand, looking into her eyes, seeing her beautiful warm smile, it was enough to make Daniel feel completely happy. Daniel, of course, solved the mystery of the girl's sad eyes on the anniversary. Luckily for him, she had broken up with a young man just the day before, and they were already getting ready to get married. Carolyn caught the groom with someone else. The guy turned out to be a womanizer. Lucky it all came out before the wedding. That's why Carolyn was sad at her brother's anniversary party. After hearing this story, Daniel mentally thanked fate for such a gift. He and Carolyn married, moved to the country, as they had once wanted to. They bought a wonderful house with a large garden. There were no noisy roads or crowds of people rushing about. Here you could really rest and relax after work. Yes, it took a little longer to get there, but it was worth it. There were many rooms in the house. 3 of them the couple planned to give for children. Both dreamed of a large family and even had no doubt that they would have at least 3 heirs. And there as it goes. With the addition to the family, the couple decided not to delay. Both were ready for children, both already established in the career. It was the right time to become parents. Only in the first year of planning a baby, nothing worked out. The couple didn't worry at the time. They knew that it happens. They enjoyed each other, the new house, made plans, dreamed, talked a lot about the future. It seemed that just a little bit more and a miracle would happen. How could it not? But it didn't. The miracle did not happen next year or in another year. Of course, the couple went to the doctors. Of course, Daniel got an appointment with the best fertility specialists. Both spouses underwent a thorough examination. Everything turned out to be fine with the father-to-be. Carolyn, on the other hand, was found to have serious reproductive problems. They did not threaten or interfere in any way, but they were an obstacle on the way to the cherished motherhood. And so began years of treatment. Carolyn obediently followed all the doctor's prescriptions, did not miss appointments, drank medicines, endured painful manipulations and unpleasant examinations. She did everything so that the children's rooms in their home would not be empty. And still nothing worked. Daniel felt sorry for Carolyn. She took every failure so hard. At first she was hopeful, almost certain of success, flying on wings. Then bitter disappointment, tears, despondency. And so it goes on and on and on. Will you stop it? One day Daniel had a serious talk with his wife. You're exhausting yourself, wasting time and nerves, ruining your health. I love you. I don't want you to suffer. Let's live for ourselves, for each other. I love you too. Carolyn smiled sadly. And that's why I'm going to give you a son. You'll see, everything will work out. I have a special feeling. Daniel sighed heavily then. He tried once again to convince his wife that he didn't have to suffer and agonize because of him, that Carolyn herself was important to him. It doesn't matter if she has a baby or not. Everything will be fine. Carolyn shook her head. We'll have a baby soon. I'm sure of it. Carolyn was right. I guess she did have a keen intuition. A couple months after that conversation, a miracle happened. Daniel vividly remembered the morning Carolyn told him the good news. The pregnancy test had come back positive. How happy were the eyes of the expectant mom. Daniel was breathless at her words, and suddenly tears welled up in his eyes. Was their dream almost coming true? As a doctor, Daniel was aware of the risks. Not all pregnancies end with the birth of a baby. There was still a long and difficult road ahead, especially with Carolyn's health not in good shape. But they had a chance, and it's a good one. Finally, the pregnancy is proving to be a real challenge. Carolyn almost lost the baby several times at different stages. She had to go into labor and delivery every now and then. Carolyn didn't complain, followed all the doctor's recommendations, and took care of herself like a crystal vase. What an anxious, exciting period it was. Carolyn had many ultrasounds, so it became known early on that she was expecting a boy. I told you I was going to give you a son. Carolyn rejoiced. And then 2 more daughters. We have 3 nurseries. The threat persisted throughout the pregnancy. The baby seemed to be progressing well. The problem was Carolyn's health. She was getting worse and worse. The body coped poorly with the load and now and then wanted to get rid of the woman from the impossible burden. The doctors kept the pregnancy alive. Daniel, as much as he could, tried to support his wife. All in all, it was hard on everyone. Of course, Carolyn was the one who suffered the most, but she did not complain about anything, did not regret. The woman knew what all this suffering was for. For the sake of the child, Carolyn was ready to endure anything. The labor began much earlier than the due date. Good thing Carolyn was in the hospital at the time. Everything happened rapidly. The baby was born very weak and was immediately placed in a cuvette. There was no prognosis. It was 50/50 whether he would survive or not. Carolyn demanded more precise information from the doctors, but Daniel knew. He himself had often been in such a situation, when everything depended on something unknown, unexplored. Now he suddenly found himself in the role of a parent like the ones he often dealt with, helpless, confused. An anxious boy named Justin after his ailing paternal grandfather. He was weak, too, they say, born prematurely. They nursed him on the stove. Nobody believed he'd make it, but he did. Not only did he survive, but he became a tall, strong, powerful man. But little Justin wasn't doing so well. At first he couldn't breathe. His lungs hadn't matured. When that problem was corrected, serious vision abnormalities were discovered. The boy was in danger of going blind. Daniel got everyone he knew on their feet. The child was operated on at the best ophthalmology center in the country. He seemed to be fine. Justin lived in the hospital the whole time. They wouldn't let him go home. He had to be under constant medical supervision. Carolyn and Danielle visited him often. The baby was growing up, looking more and more like a normal baby, a cute baby with chubby cheeks and curious eyes. When Justin was discharged in the 6th month of his life, the couple had a celebration. They didn't invite anyone. They celebrated together, sitting in the living room, drinking wine. Little Justin was snoring peacefully in his nursery, which had waited so long for an owner. Carolyn and Danielle talked about their son's future, made plans. Finally, the threat to their baby's life and serious health problems had passed. No, of course, Justin was far behind his peers who were born on time. But he can see. He'll soon be walking, then talking. When the baby was first born, doctors immediately prepared the parents for the worst. Justin might not survive and could be left profoundly disabled. On the background of such prospects, minor health problems seemed a trifle. We can't all be superheroes. I think our Justin will be smart, Carolyn speculated about her son's future. His eyes are so attentive, studying. It's as if he already understands everything. Daniel smiled. He didn't notice anything like that. A child is just a child. The main thing is that it is alive and relatively healthy. But he didn't want to upset his wife. All the more, who knows, maybe she was right. Life went on as usual. Daniel worked hard. The number of patients, unfortunately, did not decrease. Every day, children from all over the country needed the help of an experienced neurosurgeon. Carolyn was busy at home, cooking mind-blowing dishes, recipes for which she found on the internet, creating coziness in the rooms. Daniel returned to his family nest with great joy every time. Dizzying aromas from the kitchen. Cleanliness and order. Around here you'd miss it. A wife and a son. That's happiness. It wasn't so easy with Justin, though. The effects of prematurity continued to manifest themselves. The boy was often sick, and not like other children, a temperature for a couple of days and again jumps like a young goat. No, Justin was hospitalized 5 times before the age of 3 with pneumonia. His son grew up weak, pale, and sickly. Sometimes Daniel's heart ached with pity and tenderness when he saw Justin. He was fragile, vulnerable. Justin quickly grew tired of playing with his friends on the playground. The other kids were running around the square, having noisy battles, laughing a lot. Justin was eager to be part of this fun group, and the children were happy to welcome him. Justin was a wonderful guy, smart, kind, sensitive. Such are usually loved in teams. But the boy's battery quickly ran out, and he returned to his mother or father on the bench. So in sat the kid until the end of the walk, looking longingly at the merry peers. It was a sad sight. But Daniel was sure Justin would get over it. After all, he was the one who had to overcome a lot of things right after he was born. He'd get over it too. Sometimes Daniel and Carolyn talked about having a second child. After all, they had both originally planned a large family. But now, looking at Justin, they were afraid. At least their son wasn't disabled. And how many risks were there if things got worse the second time around? And Carolyn could hardly endure the pregnancy. She herself was on the verge of death many times. The couple was scared. They were afraid of repeating the story with a more severe outcome, and therefore did not hurry to plan a second child. Carolyn often went with Justin to clinics and rehabilitation centers. The baby needed a lot of attention and care more than healthy children. The boy was engaged in a variety of specialist sports coaches, homeopaths, early development experts. The results, of course, there were, especially in terms of mental abilities. At the age of 3, Justin was already slowly reading and quite fluently operated with numbers within 5. A little genius, that's what his acquaintances jokingly called Justin. Daniel was proud of his son's progress. It turned out to be such a joy when your child succeeds in something. But physically, Justin was still very weak. He couldn't even go to daycare because he picked up infections so quickly. And that was troubling. Daniel chased the bad thoughts away, reassured himself that the child was under the control of doctors, and they found nothing serious. Or maybe someone had a bad feeling about Daniel. How many children had he seen in his life? Hundreds of little patients had passed through his hands, and the man had learned to distinguish strong, promising kids with good potential from the troubled ones. Unfortunately, Justin fell into the latter category. Daniel didn't share his suspicions with his wife. She was worried enough as it was. Maybe she sensed something too. Trouble came on New Year's Eve. Justin took a little longer than usual to walk with his mother on the slide, which was built in the center of their cottage village. The weather was warm, and snow was falling in large flakes from the sky. It was beautiful. The scenery was like a Christmas card. Justin still didn't want to go home. Carolyn went along with him and let him go out in the snow with the neighborhood kids. The boy, as always, quickly tired and sat down on a bench closer to his mother. But he still refused to come back. He sat with a smile, watching his peers, who began to build a snow fortress. And then the boy didn't have the strength to go home. Carolyn, as always, carried him to the porch in her arms. Justin was only 3.5 years old, yet he weighed probably as much as 2 one-year-olds. By late afternoon, the boy had a fever. He must have sweated while playing on the slide and then frozen on the bench. Carolyn called a doctor right away. He examined the child, prescribed medication, and told her to keep an eye on him. By morning, it was obvious that hospitalization was unavoidable. Justin was burning up. The antipyretics weren't working. Daniel called an ambulance, which took Carolyn and Justin away. The man himself followed them in his car. From the emergency room, the boy was taken up to the intensive care unit. The parents were released to go home. Carolyn cried all the way home, berating herself. We should have brought him home right away, but he was begging for us to stay. I let a 3-year-old get in the way. It's all my fault. Daniel tried unsuccessfully to calm his wife, but he was not very successful. Justin was again diagnosed with pneumonia, this time bilateral. The baby was in intensive care in critical condition. Again, Danielle and Carolyn lay awake at night, startled by every phone call. What if it was from the hospital? Carolyn didn't know everything. Since Danielle, using her connections, had asked the attending physician not to fill her in on the frightening details, Justin was between life and death. He was hooked up to machines, treated with powerful medications. The hope that the boy would survive was fading by the day. Secretly from his wife, Daniel went out to prominent professors, consulted even with foreign colleagues, looking for salvation for his son. It was hard to go through it all alone. But telling Carolyn that Justin was in critical condition was not an option. The treatment helped. Justin was slowly on the mend. Danielle exhaled. The baby still remained in the NICU, but his life was now out of danger. The crisis had passed. True, the serious illness plus intensive treatment had not gone away. Justin was once again cured of pneumonia, but the price was an acquired heart defect. Many of the drugs the boy was given had side effects. At that time, there was no opportunity to think about the potential harm of treatment, just to get the child out. Now the consequences have taken their toll. And they have. Justin had become a cardiologist on top of all his other problems. So much trouble for one small, skinny little boy, not even 4 years old. The kid was constantly examined. Doctors kept the situation under control. But Justin's condition was becoming increasingly critical. The disease was progressing rapidly. Carolyn was at first relieved when the threat to her only child's life was over. But a new problem again initially threw the anxious mother off balance. The doctor's prognosis sounded almost like a verdict. Justin was getting worse and worse. Then the woman pulled herself together for her son. Daniel marveled at his wife's resilience. She had to stay with Justin in hospitals, watch him, follow the numerous recommendations of doctors' physical activity, pills by the hour, constant monitoring of indicators, and so on. These worries and a rigid, busy schedule distracted Carolyn from depressing thoughts, gave strength to go on and fight for her son. Fortunately, the woman didn't know the whole truth. And the truth was this: Justin needed a complex, unique, long-term operation. It had been postponed. Carolyn thought it was because of her baby's weakness. He still hadn't fully recovered from the pneumonia. In reality, no surgeon wanted to take on such a patient. Daniel knew that Justin had a high chance of not surviving the long surgery. The man sent copies of his son's medical history to various centers and clinics, including foreign ones. The answer from everywhere was about the same. Daniel realized that without surgery, his son would not last long. He would fade away day by day, and they, the parents, would only have to watch. It was hard to realize this. No one gave an exact date. Maybe a year, maybe even 2, but no more than 5. That is, without surgical intervention, my son will not live even until the end of the 2nd grade. And in general, about school in such a situation, probably will not even have to think about it. The boy's condition will gradually worsen, and eventually he will go to bed. What's school for? But surgery is a huge risk for Justin. It's not a sure thing. On the contrary, it could make the problem worse, bring the end closer. The boy may never wake up from the anesthesia. And the manipulation of a small heart must be carried out at the highest level. No one wanted to take on that responsibility. Daniel was desperate. He was afraid of losing not only his son, but also his wife. If the worst happened to Justin, Carolyn wouldn't be able to bear it. That evening, the man sat in his office. It had been a long shift. He hadn't had a minute all day to sort through the paperwork. And now Daniel was making up for lost time. He didn't hurry home. No one was there anyway. Carolyn was back in the hospital with Justin. The boy needed supportive therapy. Her wife, unlike Daniel, still believed that everything would be all right. She didn't know how things really were. The man often doubted whether he was doing the right thing, hiding the truth from his beloved. But he didn't dare to tell Carolyn everything. The figures in the report jumped in front of his eyes. Daniel could not concentrate. He was exhausted from the day's work, and worrying about his son and wife didn't make him productive. The man decided it was time to call it a day. He would have a cup of coffee before the road, so that his eyes wouldn't slip while driving. Daniel walked to the coffee machine at the far end of the hallway. From a distance, he spotted Franklin, a colleague and longtime friend from the cardiology department. The man had tried to help Daniel in his difficult situation as best he could. He had utilized all his connections. Daniel was grateful for that. Franklin took a wide stride toward Daniel. In his hand, he held a tall glass of steaming Americano. "You're here, aren't you?" Franklin smiled at his friend. "What else you got going on at home?" "That's great." Daniel replied, "I've got great news for you. I thought I'd tell you tomorrow. But now that you're here. Anyway, Justin has a real chance of recovery." Daniel looked at Franklin questioningly. Hope began to rise in the man's soul again. His buddy looked so confident. Confident? Daniel hesitated, forbidding himself to hope. It had happened so many times before. And every time it failed. "There's a young surgeon in Denver," Franklin continued. "She's a cardiologist at the med school. She graduated not too long ago, but she's already gained experience. She works with foreign clinics. She is passionate about research and innovation. It's a mystery when she has time for everything. This lady specializes in children and prefers complex cases. She pulls out patients that other doctors gave up on long ago. And she can do it, can't she?" Daniel was surprised. "So she is a star in the world of medicine. But why don't we know anything about her?" "She's a star, but a rising star," Franklin said confidently. "She's got a lot ahead of her, and it won't be long before everyone knows." "So I contacted her, sent her Justin's story. I didn't even tell you, so you wouldn't get your hopes up because I could see how hard it was for you. But then, just this evening, she sent me a reply. This young luminary is willing to do Justin's surgery. She just needs to meet with you or Carolyn to discuss it in person." Wow. Daniel exhaled, unable to believe his ears. Everyone was giving up on Justin. Would the young doctor be willing to fight for my boy? But I'd have to meet her first, learn more about her practical experience. I don't want to make my son a guinea pig for an up-and-coming star. The cost of making a mistake is too great. "Anyway, you have a meeting the day after tomorrow," Franklin said. "I've already arranged it with the head doctor, so they'll let you go. You'll fly to Denver, you'll sign everything there, and we'll get to know her. It'll all work out." "She's great," Franklin said. "I've heard of her. She's very talented. She's young, but she's got a lot of experience, so don't look at her age." And so, 2 days after that conversation at the coffee machine, Daniel sat in front of the office of Rebecca, the young female surgeon who would save his son. In that time, the man had learned a lot about her, where she studied, where she practiced, what she excelled at. From everything, it appeared that Rebecca was indeed a young talent. She had some very difficult cases in her practice. Daniel had seen pictures of her young, beautiful, more like a photo model than a heart surgeon. And yet Daniel saw something vaguely familiar in the young surgeon's face. She looked a lot like someone, maybe an actress or a singer. Her appearance was very striking, correct facial features, long hair, slender figure. Now Rebecca was on her rounds. According to the staff, she was very attentive to her little patients. Finally, light footsteps were heard at the end of the corridor. Daniel's heart raced with excitement. He saw a silhouette, a young girl in a white coat, walking briskly toward her office. Her hair fluttered, a pencil sticking out behind her ear. As Rebecca approached Daniel, he had a strange feeling again. He'd met this woman somewhere before. The look in her huge gray eyes was painfully familiar. Rebecca smiled kindly at Daniel and invited him into her office. That smile made the man's heart warm. Rebecca was an open, sensitive person. Such people were always easy and pleasant to work with. In the office, Daniel involuntarily looked around. Everything was just like his own, shelves filled with books and files, a desk piled with documents, a couch in the corner, and even a shelf with children's creations. Good patients? he asked, nodding at the shelf. Absolutely, Rebecca smiled. Why don't you have a seat? I brought Justin's medical history. Daniel handed the young doctor a puffy folder with documents and scans. Your colleague has already mailed everything to me, Rebecca said. I'm familiar with your situation, and even the treatment plan is ready. I can't say it will be easy, but I think we can manage. It seemed to Daniel that Rebecca's words made the room feel brighter and warmer. She gave him hope. There was a reason this woman had such a wonderful name. I had a similar case with a girl, but she was older than your baby, Rebecca continued. She's fine now. Justin will do everything we can to make this happen. Daniel asked Rebecca questions about his son's treatment that he was very interested in. She answered in detail, thoroughly, thoughtfully. The man quickly realized that she was a professional and innovator. It is such people who move medicine forward. This girl has a great future. She will save more than 100 lives and even more. After all, her techniques and schemes will then be used by other doctors. On top of everything else, Rebecca turned out to be an incredibly nice person. She looked at Daniel with sympathy, tried very hard to support him, to cheer him up. She understood how hard it was for him. When the formal questions and signing of the documents were over, Rebecca suddenly asked the man an unexpected question. And you? Don't you recognize me at all? Daniel took a closer look at the young heart surgeon's face. Those gray eyes of yours. They look very familiar, he admitted. But I can't remember where we've met before. I'm not surprised, Rebecca smiled. It was a long time ago. I was barely 7 years old then. I'm Nadezhda Selivanova, an old patient of yours. So that's it, Daniel slapped his forehead. Of course I'm glad you're doing well. Thanks in part to you, Rebecca smiled. You saved my life. They didn't even want to take me on, they'd written me off. That's what Dad told me later. And back then, when I was bedridden, my parents assured me that everything would be fine. Although the doctors told them otherwise, Rebecca continued, they wanted me to believe in the best. It was the right thing to do. Daniel nodded his head. I remember your parents, too. They're wonderful. The man switched to you in an unnoticeable way. It wasn't a woman surgeon he didn't know well. And Nadia was the same, Nadenka. I'll do anything to save your son, Rebecca said. It's amazing what fate has thrown my way. Justin has become my patient. There's a reason for that. I believe in signs. We surgeons are superstitious, the new ones know that. Yes, that's true, Daniel nodded. I believe in signs too. That's how fate works. Now I'm in your parents' shoes. What was it like for them? I felt it all. It's scary to imagine. But don't worry, everything will be fine. Organizing Justin's transportation to Nizhny Novgorod took several days. We had to prepare documents, take a lot of tests, conduct another examination. Daniel had a lot of help from all his colleagues. In the end, we managed even faster than we had planned. And now the baby was already in the hospital under the careful supervision of Rebecca. She immediately found a common language with both Justin and Carolyn. Both of them literally fell in love with the smiling young doctor. Rebecca's mere presence gave them confidence in a happy outcome. Daniel never met her again. Rebecca had a lot of work to do. She didn't have time for chit-chat. But they did talk on the phone a few times, discussing the upcoming surgery. The surgery lasted 8 hours. During that time, Danielle and Carolyn were worried sick. First they sat in the hospital, then they wandered around the neighborhood of the medical center. It seems that they sat in a cafe, visited some museum. After a while, the couple couldn't even remember what they did to fill the agonizing hours of waiting. Daniel held Carolyn's hand tightly. Her palm was cold, icy cold, although May had been hot and sunny that year. Daniel was impatient every minute, pulling his cell phone out of his pocket, fiddling with it, flipping through the news feed. He waited for the call. When the surgery is over, Rebecca will call, she promised, Carolyn said. Why are you so worried? It won't be much longer. My surgeries take longer than that, Daniel tried to reassure her. Carolyn didn't know the risks. Daniel was still taking care of his wife. Finally, the long-awaited call came. Everything went well, Rebecca's tired voice came through the phone. It was hard, but we did it. The team was great. Your son is a hero. He'll be fine now. More details tomorrow. I gotta go. Daniel slumped helplessly on the bench. He had a smile on his face, which his wife immediately realized. "Justin is fine," Carolyn said affirmatively. Rebecca had worked a miracle. After the operation, Justin recovered quickly. He was only in the intensive care unit for 2 days, and that was only because of the protocol. Then Carolyn went to the hospital with him. Daniel, the attending physician, had to go back. There were patients waiting for him in the capital. There was a lot of work to do during his absence. Now he would have to spend the night at the clinic. But Daniel was not frightened by the emergency, especially now that Justin was doing well. The boy was looking better. A blush was appearing on his count with each passing day. It was beautiful and very unusual. Daniel was used to seeing his son pale with black eyes. Suddenly, Justin was a rosy-cheeked, bright-eyed baby boy. Carolyn shared Justin's new progress with her husband every day. "He's so energetic. He's running around with the children from the neighboring rooms, almost on his ears, and he doesn't get tired. I was already exhausted. I can't keep an eye on him anymore." "I'll have to get you a vitamin complex," Daniel smiled. "Because now it will always be like this." "I'm so happy." Daniel had to leave Nizhny Novgorod early. Justin, on the other hand, still had to receive treatment at Rebecca's ward. Before his flight, the man stopped by his former doctor's office to thank her. However, he had no words to express his feelings. She had saved his son, and therefore his wife. This is his whole life, his happiness and destiny. How to describe it in words? Rebecca was sitting at her desk, quickly writing something. When she saw Daniel, she smiled and broke away from her urgent business. "Rebecca, I don't even know what to say," Daniel said, taking a seat across from her. "You saved my son, you saved all of us. I can't even find the words to describe how grateful I am." "I was just doing my job," Rebecca shrugged. "And then we're even. Did your father take you to the sea then?" Daniel asked suddenly. Years ago, he had been very interested in that question. Rebecca wanted so much to get well soon to see the sea. Had her dream come true? "Yes," Rebecca smiled warmly. "It was a wonderful trip. It was the first time we went to the sea as a family. We swam, sunbathed, sat in cafes every day. My parents sold the garage to fulfill my dream. They must have been so happy that I survived that they did this impulsive thing." "They're really good at what they do," Daniel said. "You needed positive emotions and sea air more than any medicine at that time. So parents and tried for the health of their daughter." "I swam with a dolphin too," Rebecca remembered. "True, not in the open sea, as in my dream, but in a dolphinarium. It must have cost my parents a lot of money. I mean, we've always been poor. But that summer after the operation, it was so happy. I felt like the whole world was spinning around me." "But you deserved it," Daniel said seriously. "You were a real hero. The whole staff marveled at how good you were. Not all kids have that kind of resilience." "Do you remember my box?" Rebecca asked. "I gave it to you when you were discharged." "Of course, it still holds a place of honor in my collection. It's on the shelf, and when I look at it, I think of you, that little girl, bigger than my eyes, cheerful." "Do you remember what was inside it?" Rebecca asked. "Inside?" Daniel was surprised. "I didn't even think there was anything in there," Daniel said. "So you didn't open it?" Rebecca's eyes lit up like 2 torches. Surprisingly, they were gray and cold, then suddenly bright and piercing. "No, I didn't," Daniel replied. "Will you be sure to open it when you get home?" Rebecca asked. "Sure, I can't wait," Daniel admitted. And that was the truth. Daniel stood in his office. In his hands, he holds the very same box, pink, shiny, decorated with paper flowers. The lid is closed with a homemade lock. So tiny that Daniel could barely manage it with his thumbs. He could have pulled harder, of course, but he didn't want to ruin something dear to his heart. At the bottom lay a color photograph of a smiling Rebecca. It must have been a graduation photo from kindergarten. Her blonde long hair was curled and beautifully tucked to the side. Her lips were slightly touched up with pink lipstick. That day, Rebecca wore a dress of sky blue color, puffy skirt, lantern sleeves. The disease had already made itself known then. There were dark circles under the girl's eyes. But Rebecca smiled broadly at the camera, holding a bouquet of scarlet roses to her chest. It was probably her favorite picture found on her. She looked like a princess. Girls just love that kind of thing. Danielle smiled. What a sweet, cute, spontaneous little girl she was. The little girl in the picture had so much ahead of her, and severe illness, and long treatment, and victory, the sea, study, work in the hospital. But that day, of course, Rebecca didn't realize it yet. She was just a little, dressed up, beautiful and happy girl. Daniel turned the picture over as he thought. On the back was a message. Rebecca had written it years ago in her childish, clumsy handwriting. The letters jumped around, leaning in different directions. There were many reasons for that. Instead of learning and practicing her handwriting, Rebecca had to undergo long and hard medical treatment. Besides, after the operation, her fingers were still not quite right. In fact, Rebecca was a future doctor. And we all know the jokes about their handwriting. "Thank you for living," Daniel read on the back of the photo. "I was told you saved me. I will now live, go to the sea. I will have children of my own someday. And I will also definitely become a doctor. I will also save children. I promise you that. You'll see in many years you'll be proud of me." Daniel looked at the scrawled lines written by a child's hand and felt an avalanche of emotions coming over him. He had not only saved Rebecca's life, he had also determined her fate. The girl promised him that she would become a doctor, and she did. And she became a doctor. The kind of doctor one turns to when there's no hope of salvation. Ironically, he had saved little Rebecca, and now she had saved his son. And not just Justin. You can't make this stuff up. I opened the box. Daniel grabbed his phone and started typing a message to Rebecca. I figured it out. "It's amazing. I can't believe it." Rebecca responded with a long string of smiley faces and hearts. I guess she was busy again. Well, busyness was a common concern. But Daniel was sure when Rebecca got his message, she definitely smiled. A little more time passed. Justin had already recovered completely. Carolyn, lying with her son in the hospital, didn't recognize her boy. Why does he have so much energy? She wondered joyfully during phone conversations with her husband. He jumps, constantly on the move. And how many ideas he has. He is cramped in the hospital corridors in a small yard. I can't wait to be discharged. That's great, said Daniel. What does Rebecca say when you're discharged? Next week. They said they'd meet us at work. Sure enough, discharge day arrived. Daniel was told to be there at 10, but he was early on purpose. He wanted to talk to Rebecca again, ask some questions, and thank her again, of course. Now he had a healthy, energetic child, a happy, calm wife, a bright future. And it was all thanks to her, Rebecca. Daniel found out in advance what time Rebecca's meeting ended. He intended to be able to talk to her in the short time between the meeting and patient rounds. When Rebecca saw Daniel at the office, she was genuinely pleased. I knew you were coming, she said. Let's go into my office. I'll tell you how Justin's doing. I'll outline a plan of action. In fact, would you like some coffee? I'd love some. I have a box of brownies. Care to join me? Daniel nodded with a smile. They sat in Rebecca's office, drinking coffee and pastries, talking like old acquaintances. Rebecca was surprisingly easy and pleasant to talk to. Daniel immediately felt a kindred spirit. During this conversation, Rebecca told him in a very informal way how Justin was doing. Your little boy is doing great. I didn't expect this result. I thought I would need another surgery. But his body did fine, recovered. For the first couple of years, you should avoid excessive exertion. But make sure you exercise every day. Your wife's aware of that, but you should also see a cardiologist at your place of residence. Ultrasound, cardiogram. And then, after that, no restrictions. Justin will lead a perfectly normal life. It's like a miracle. Justin hasn't led a perfectly normal life since he was born. His problems were largely determined by his heart condition. It was hard to detect. Multiple pneumonias triggered the progression of the disease. That's when it all came out. So everything should be back to normal now, Daniel said. Daniel wanted to know more about Rebecca's life after the operation. How did you achieve all this? How did you become a doctor? And such a talented one at that. Usually it's the children of medical dynasties who become stars. But your parents are not from the medical field, as I recall. Far from it, Rebecca grinned. Dad's a driver, Mom's a librarian. But I had a goal. Rebecca's goal took shape as soon as she learned from her parents that she was on the brink of life and death. While the girl felt bad and could not get out of bed, her mother and father encouraged her in every possible way, assuring her that she would soon be helped. In fact, at that time, the parents had already lost all hope. They had been refused so many times by doctors, assuring them that all manipulations were useless. And then suddenly a young and brave surgeon agreed to take on and found the operation. He did not give any prognosis, but assured that he would do everything he could. The parents had no choice. Without surgery, their girl would not survive, so they agreed to an experiment. They gave their eldest daughter at least a small but still a chance. Then, when it became clear that Rebecca was on the mend, the father told his daughter the truth. "So if it hadn't been for Uncle Daniel, I wouldn't be here?" clarified the little girl, looking seriously at the adults. "Yes, daughter," nodded the father. "He saved your life. Now I will always pray for him." "So what is it? If it wasn't for him, I'd be dead." Rebecca couldn't get her head around what she'd heard. She knew that children are born babies, then they grow up, many, many years go by, and people turn into old men and old women. And then they die, like the neighbor Baba Nura, or my dad's relative Grandpa Charlie. But that sometimes children also die. Rebecca couldn't realize that. "Are you not confusing anything?" the girl said, giving her parents a serious look. "Children, they haven't even lived yet. They need to study and give birth to their own children. They cannot die." The mother and father only shook their heads sadly. They did not want to continue this topic at all. Their daughter, their beloved Rebecca, would live now. So why talk about sad things now? But Rebecca couldn't stop thinking about the fact that children die, and very often from illness. Even on this ward where she was lying now. It had happened. The girl now knew it for sure. She asked the nurse who changed the bedding in the ward. She turned out to be talkative, so she told the curious girl the whole truth. That night, Rebecca couldn't sleep from the realization of injustice. She kept thinking about how sad and frightening it was. She could have done the same thing herself. It was her Uncle Daniel who saved her. Uncle Daniel. He's so handsome, so kind, so smart, the best. Uncle Daniel always understood her. If Rebecca wanted candy, he'd find her candy. If she wanted a soda, he'd get her a soda. He was a wizard. And now it turns out that Uncle Daniel didn't just cure her, he saved her life. Oh my gosh, Uncle Daniel, he's a good man. He's doing a great thing, saving children. Then they live and study, work, go to the sea and have babies of their own. I want to be like Uncle Daniel, Rebecca said with determination. She said this phrase out loud into the emptiness and darkness of the hospital room. From then on, Rebecca had no doubts about who she would be when she grew up. And to make sure Uncle Daniel had no doubts, she wrote him a letter on the back of a photograph. Daddy said to be thankful he told Rebecca to make a gift for Uncle Daniel. Rebecca glued a box for him. She worked very hard. She wanted the box to be perfect. The result, of course, was not quite to her liking. But it was still not bad. In the box, Rebecca put a picture of herself with a message. On the back, she had no doubt that Uncle Daniel wouldn't open the box. It hadn't even occurred to her. Boxes are meant to be opened. So Rebecca had already decided on her future profession at the age of 7. At first, her parents only smiled at her fervent declarations that she would become the best doctor in the world and cure all children. But Rebecca persistently pursued her goal. She watched medical channels, asked to buy her anatomical coloring books and books. Gradually, she began to understand the complex Latin names, learned the basics of genetics, read chemistry textbooks from the local library. And all by herself, with great enthusiasm. Rebecca found it difficult at first. Complicated terms, obscure words. But then the girl got into it. It turned out that medicine is very interesting and fascinating. And the goal, the very goal, still beckoned her, loomed before her eyes as a guiding star. The girl wanted to become like Uncle Daniel. There should be a lot of such people on Earth, so that there would be enough for all the sick children. Her parents tried to talk her out of going to medical school. You're a smart girl, of course, but there's such a competition. Lamented the mother. No enrollment, you'll have to lose a year of time somewhere. Submit documents. It's better to go to Polytechnic or to study economics. The chances are much better, my father joined in. But Rebecca stood her ground. Medicine, period. She'd been preparing for it for so long. She'd been going for it for so long. No, Rebecca couldn't change her dream. She couldn't, and she didn't want to. She did it. She got in. She got a dorm room. She plunged headfirst into her studies. With each passing year, Rebecca realized more and more clearly that she had chosen the right path. Medicine was her calling. She was a very active student, read a lot of additional literature, participated in all kinds of projects and programs. She even teamed up with students from foreign universities. Young people shared their experience, tried to solve some problems together. Rebecca's heart sang. She felt like a fish in water. Rebecca chose a different specialization than she had originally planned. She wanted to be a neurosurgeon like Uncle Daniel, but in the course of training it turned out that the girl is more attracted to cardiology. So Rebecca became a surgeon in the cardiology department. At her first operation, her heart was pounding so hard that it seemed to be heard by the whole operating room. Rebecca was worried, of course, but excited too. She was finally going to start doing what she had been striving for all her life, saving people. Time passed, Rebecca gained experience and at the same time was engaged in scientific work. The girl was interested in complex, non-standard cases. Rebecca was often brought patients who were refused by other doctors, and she nursed them back to health. She saved them, gave them a chance for a long and happy life. Grateful parents, smiling, cheerful little patients, how it all pleased the soul. Rebecca felt that she was bringing goodness, joy, and light into the world. It was not for nothing that Uncle Daniel had saved her. You see, it's a wonderful thing, Rebecca reasoned. You saved me 20 years ago, which means that if it hadn't been for you, the children I saved wouldn't have survived. It's amazing. I became a doctor. Any of your patients become teachers, engineers, drivers, and they're all doing good. They're all doing something important and good. That's how goodness spreads through the world. Daniel looked at Rebecca and smiled. He felt the same way she did. On her wedding day, the bride received an unexpected call, barely taking a note out of the groom's pocket. "Chiara, I'm telling you, stop messing with my son's head," screamed a woman in her 60s in the small kitchen. It seemed that her shout was heard throughout the entire Khrushchevka. "I don't want anything for him. It's his choice. Your son is a grown man, and he should know better who to associate his life with," Chiara said. "Remember, baby," the woman whispered sharply and leaned closer to Chiara. "Eugene will never commit to someone like you." "What kind of girl?" Chiara asked. "The poor, deceitful one." "Cunning," the woman whispered. "I am not a trickster," the girl replied quietly. Anyone else in her place would have either thrown a temper tantrum or cried. But Chiara kept her composure. She was ready for this conversation. For months now she had been harassed by her mother-in-law Amélie, an overbearing lady who loved her son Eugene very much. Eugene, a modest young man of 28, had chosen a poor girl from the suburbs as his bride. Chiara did not notify her mother. Amélie learned of Chiara's existence by chance when she once again tried to match her son with a neighbor's daughter. In fact, Amélie's neighbor in the cottage village was an official from the region, with whom she had been on long friendly terms since her student days. Amélie herself also became not the last person in the region. Together with her husband Stephen, she founded a considerable company and was still actively engaged in business. Stephen was the complete opposite of his wife, a modest businessman who never meddled in his son's personal life. He was always quietly engaged in his business. Only sometimes he wondered how Eugene was doing. He himself thought the idea of having to marry a bureaucrat's daughter was wild. He believed that marriages of convenience were a thing of the past. Moreover, in spite of Amélie's peculiar character and her ability to make connections with the right people, they conducted their business honestly, and a family alliance with an influential family wouldn't be good for business. So Amélie's motivation was based solely on her outdated notions of nobility and honorable marriages. But realizing the absurdity of the situation did nothing to help Stephen's influence on his wife. Just like Eugene, he was in a subordinate position to Amélie and almost never argued with her. Stephen's friends and relatives at first wondered how such different people could get along together. But apparently this was the secret of their marital happiness. Fervent temperament Amélie extinguished rational, modest Stephen, She gave their relationship energy, and he processed it and directed in the right direction. But if the elder Stephen was able to find himself next to such a wife, their son Eugene experienced a variety of difficulties during his growing up, and, as it turned out, in the period of quite independent life. The events that took place in Eugene's childhood and adolescence are not of any interest and will cause rather a sense of embarrassment and shame for overprotective Amalie. But Eugene's character went to his father and was sympathetic to his mother's temperament. Moreover, over time, the situation improved. For example, Amelie did not interfere with her son's idea to move to a rented apartment on his own money. Although initially she planned that Eugene will live in their huge family cottage, which will be inherited by him. After moving in, Eugene was even excited had his mother realized that he had long since become an adult. But one thing made him doubt it. About once a month, Amelie unobtrusively hinted to Eugene about the neighbor's unmarried daughter. Eugene kindly dismissed it, saying she wasn't his type. He was in no hurry to start a family. Then one day he met Chiara, a girl from a working-class family who had lost her father early. She worked as a consultant in a clothing store that Eugene often visited. It wasn't in the center of town, and it didn't sell high-end clothes. Eugene didn't need the glitz. He always wore what he was comfortable with. The cheapness of the clothing store where Chiara worked not only shows Eugene's modesty, but also that she didn't fall in love with him for his money. The workers of the store realized that their customers are mostly not the richest people. That's why, when they first started talking and Chiara didn't know about Eugene's parents, she perceived him as an ordinary, modest guy. It was only later that Eugene told her that he worked for his parents' large company. Chiara was even a little embarrassed at first, but Eugene did his best not to show the difference in their financial situation. As their relationship progressed, the X-hour grew closer and closer. Sooner or later, Eugene needed to tell his mom about Chiara coming into his life. He tried to delay the moment as long as possible, but one day he let it slip. That afternoon, Amelie tried again to hint to her son about the neighbor's marriage. Eugene, please listen to me one more time. You're not a little boy anymore. Maybe it's time you started thinking about your own family. Mom, let me put it this way. If I'm not a little boy anymore, can I decide when and with whom I should start a family? Well, you know how worried I am about you. I don't want you to be used by some girl who's going to see you for your wallet. I know you want what's best for me, but look at me. Is it written on my forehead that I come from a rich family? You have nobility written all over your forehead, son. Give up your nobility. Please, this is the 21st century, not the 19th. What's the century got to do with it? I just don't want you to feel bad about it. Clara's not an option, Mom. But we've talked about it so many times, she's not my type. How much do you know about your own tastes? I do. Eugene was starting to get a little annoyed, but then he pulled himself together. How? Would you say you know who your real taste is? You'd be surprised, but I do. Eugene hadn't intended to talk about Chiara on this particular day, but he figured it was the right time. What? Amelie was surprised. Did you find a girl? I did. A long time ago, almost 6 months now. Why didn't you say anything? Me? I was afraid of your reaction. Well, what can I say? You were right to be afraid, weren't you? Who is she? Where did she come from? Eugene started trying to come up with a better description. She works in the retail and service industry. I see. A saleswoman, Amelie said, and pretended to feel sick. Mom, what are you doing? Eugene ran to get some water and handed the glass to his mom. I don't understand your reaction. Who are her parents? I don't really know. Dad's dead, I think. Mom works in a factory or something. You know how to surprise me. What's the difference? Why do you think people who weren't born with a golden spoon in their mouth are second class? You're probably too young to realize that. You just can't explain it. You're living in your barbarian stereotypes. Everyone's laughing at you. What are you talking about? Eugene, I'm a laughingstock. Well, Mom. Eugene thought he was overreacting. That's not what I meant. I just think it would be better if you reconsidered and accepted Ciara. I'm not taking anyone anywhere. Since you're such an adult, you can live your own life. Don't you even want to meet her? No, Amelie said, but she looked her son in the eye. You know, it's better if I see for myself who she is. You'll get the naughty one. That's good. You'll like her. After that conversation, Eugene's joy was short-lived. After a while, he had some disturbing thoughts. What if his mother had agreed to meet Ciara, not because she wanted to get in touch, but to personally persuade Ciara to break up with him? Amelie was capable of that. Eugene's fears were not in vain. From their first meeting, Amelie had tried to show Ciara where she belonged. Eugene had urged his mother to hold back, and she had partially kept her promise. In front of her son, she played the role of the quiet, calm mother, the future mother-in-law. But as soon as Ciara and Amelie were alone together, the fight would begin. It didn't happen very often. Usually the heated conversation took place over the phone. The first time Amelie called Ciara was the morning after they first met. Ciara, is that you? Yes, who's calling? You have a bad memory for voices. It's Amelie. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't recognize you. It's just the noise outside. But I'm coming home now. Wait, don't be in a hurry to go home. I don't want Eugene to know about this conversation. Ciara instantly tensed up. Listen to me carefully. You're not a bad girl at first glance. But remember, I am a predator. I can see through your intentions. And I sense that you are in fact a mercantile shepherdess. And I would hate to see you anywhere near my son again. Amelie, why are you doing this? I really love your son. Come on, tell me your fairy tales. You've got the wrong girl. I'm asking you nicely to leave my son alone. I'm not bothering him. We have mutual feelings for each other, and I'm not going to break up with Eugene because of your whims. Oh, so that's how it is. Well, I'm going to make your life a lot of fun. What do you mean? You'll find out. And don't let Eugene find out about this conversation. Ciara, of course, was out of her mind. She wanted to cry, but she couldn't, because then Eugene would suspect something. He'd end up fighting with his mother. And Ciara didn't want to cause any discord between Eugene and Amelie. So they lived like that for a few months. Once every 2 weeks, Amelie would pester Ciara with her talk and threats. But it must be said, nothing went beyond threats. Ciara wondered what Amelie could theoretically come up with to break up her and Eugene start a rumor about a mistress. Someone could frame her. Just in case, Ciara began to behave more carefully, avoided possible casual acquaintances, closed all pages in social networks. In such a state of siege, Ciara's nervous system suffered significantly. But apparently it gave its fruits. In her relationship with Eugene, they were in perfect harmony. And she never got any action from Amelie. Sometimes Ciara wondered if Eugene suspected something. One couldn't be so naive as not to see the maximum heat in the relationship between the girl she loved and her mother. But Eugene was not only modest, but also an impossibly simple man. It was easy enough with him to pretend that everything was fine. He believed it, or just really wanted to believe it. Ciara decided that such naivety would be good for her. Her plan was to just hold out until the wedding. And then Amelie would have no choice but to accept it. And everything went according to her plan. Calls from her potential mother-in-law became much less frequent, and their tone was no longer so categorical. Finally, Eugene proposed to Ciara. Everything happened the classic way: the restaurant, the champagne, the ring. Ciara was absolutely happy. She thought she'd won everything, but she didn't. The proposal was a wake-up call for Amelie. Apparently, the woman had decided she had no chance of ending the relationship, so she went into overdrive. Then Amelie personally went to her son's rented apartment where Eugene and Ciara lived. She deliberately waited until her son was at work to be alone with Ciara. That night, they had a conversation in which Amelie called Ciara a fraud. You're a fraud yourself. You've been leading naive Eugene around by the nose. Well, you think you got what you wanted, don't you? There's not going to be a wedding. You can't stop Eugene and I from being happy, Amelie. No, I won't. Amelie just grinned back. She was about to leave when the door opened and Eugene came in. "Oh, Mom, hi. What are you doing here?" "I stopped by to check on the newlyweds." Amelie's acting skills were just fine. Without blinking an eye, she switched from the character of Hera to that of a caring mother-in-law. "That's so wonderful," rejoiced naive Eugene, unsuspecting. "Eugene, listen," Ciara began to say. "There's something I want to tell you." "Yes, that's right, son. Ciara and I have been thinking about the best way to have a wedding." Amelie interrupted her. She realized that her potential daughter-in-law was about to snap and tell Eugene about her problem. "What are you thinking?" Eugene asked. "No, I wanted to talk about something else," Ciara continued. "I think the wedding should be canceled." There was an oppressive silence. Amelie was as surprised by Ciara's statement as Eugene was. She really thought Ciara was going to complain about her, but apparently she'd managed to squeeze her rival after all. "What?" Eugene interjected. "Did I hear that?" "No, you didn't hear that. I don't think I'm ready to get married yet." "Mom, did you say something to her?" Eugene asked irritably. "No, I didn't. What does this have to do with me?" Amelie shook her head in a negative way, pretending not to understand. "Then, Ciara, please explain what's going on." "I've decided that we are very different people. I have no place in your circle." "What circle?" Eugene was puzzled. "You're still feeling Mom's influence, aren't you?" "Look, there is no my circle. It's just you and me in a circle, a two-person circle. We both fit into it perfectly." No, please, at least let me go. I need a pause." Ciara quickly packed her things and left. She ran down the wet sidewalks that hadn't had time to dry from the recent rain. Yes, what Ciara had so feared for the past few months had happened: a violent, hysterical, and uncompromising breakdown. For too long she had tolerated it, feared it, kept it to herself. Just before she left, she wondered if she should say it all to Amelie's face, in front of Eugene. But then it would be a cruel blow to Eugene in the first place. Ciara decided not to upset the tight-knit family. If anything, Eugene would find many more interesting girls. He would not remain lonely. But Ciara was not ready to endure Amelie's attacks for the rest of her life. She realized that the wedding is not a panacea, and a stamp in the passport may not affect the behavior of her mother-in-law. That's why Ciara decided to take such a desperate step. In 20 minutes, she ran to her apartment, entered it, and lay on the couch with her face in the pillow. Her mom had gone to the country during the summer months, so the apartment was empty. Ciara lay on the couch and thought about nothing. She couldn't even cry. There was no strength left for tears. After lying like that for a while, Ciara got up, took a sedative, and went outside again. Just lying there idly, she couldn't do it either. Ciara was in a state where she didn't know what she wanted. But it was necessary to be active. That's when people do stupid things, sometimes the most irreparable. Who knows how that day would have ended for Ciara if a black SUV hadn't honked at her on the way out of the driveway. She turned around, looked at the driver, then at the license plates, and sighed in relief. It was Eugene's father, Stephen's car. Ciara took her time getting into the front seat. "Hello, Stephen," she said quietly. Ciara had only seen Eugene's father twice in her life. He had never visited them himself, and when Eugene invited Ciara to their family cottage, Stephen was usually working. "But hello, Ciara," he said and drove forward. "Where are we going?" "To your place," Ciara asked fearfully. "No, you what?" "I'm not sending you there. We're going to a nice place. I think we have a lot to talk about." "Okay." Ciara thought it was Eugene who had asked her father to talk to her and bring her back to him. At first, she had feared that Stephen would think of nothing better to do than just take her back to the house where the scandals with Amelie would begin again. But as it turned out, Eugene's dad decided to do something more subtle. He took her to a small cafe called Lavender in the center of town. Ciara and Stephen chose a table and ordered. "I love this place," Stephen began to talk while waiting for their order. "Not Amelie's style at all. We usually prefer other places, but you know what I mean? I come here when I want to be alone or to talk to someone about personal matters. The atmosphere is good, not flashy. Yes, it's very cozy here, Kiara answered and stared. You probably think it was Eugene who asked me to talk to you, don't you? No, it's my own improvisation, Stephen cut to the chase. I called Amelia about an hour ago on a work-related matter, and she told me about your escape, and I realized I couldn't stay in the shadows any longer. You see, I've always thought that grown-ups can sort out their own relationships. You think so too, don't you? I do, Ciara said. Yes, that's right. Stephen didn't let Ciara finish. But when another powerful person interferes in an adult relationship and, moreover, destroys it, a third person is needed to balance the situation. So I thought I'd be that third person for a while. Thank you. There's nothing to thank me for. I really want you to go back to Eugene. Is that what you want? I don't want Eugene's relationship with his mom to go south. It's not that important right now. Amelia sighed, would you be willing to go back to Eugene? Of course I would. That's a good answer. Now let's think about what's stopping you from doing that. More precisely, who's stopping you from doing it? Stephen asked. Of course you hate to hear Amelie say anything she tells you. I understand that perfectly well. But understand, take a detached view of her. She's not going to do anything bad to you in terms of actual actions. And with time she'll get used to it, and then she'll love it. I know her psychology well. I too thought at first that Amelie would temper her ardor, Ciara said. For a moment I thought that was what was really happening. But as soon as Eugene proposed to me, it started all over again, treating it like a final battle. She decided to concentrate all her resources and pour the maximum out on me. She'll calm down after the wedding, Stephen said confidently. In fact, I'm almost certain that she'll change her attitude toward you much sooner. I don't know, Ciara said hesitantly, but right now she's glad I'm gone. And imagine me coming back. What would her reaction be? I mean, she could do anything. I understand your concerns. So here's what we're going to do. I'll have a serious talk with her, try to moderate her temper, and generally intervene every time she gets on your nerves. Just text me, that's all. I'll call her right away. Okay? But I'll have to bother you every time. Ciara hesitated. Don't worry about that. I'm interested in solving this situation myself. Stephen leaned over and whispered, I never liked those Joneses and their golden daughter. Ciara grinned, knowing full well of Amelie's intentions to marry Eugene off to the neighbor's daughter. And since that's the case, of course I'll let you know. But let's wait at least 24 hours. I'll call Eugene tomorrow, okay? Stephen asked for the bill and paid it. Okay, Ciara, I gotta go. Where do you want to ride? Go. I'll just sit here for a while. Stephen said goodbye to Ciara and left the cafe. Ciara, alone with her tea. She finally had some hope in the last day. Was there really one normal person in Eugene's family who understood how to solve her problem? No, Ciara thought Eugene was normal too. Eugene was too indecisive and naive, and she wanted to keep him away from conflicts with his mother as much as possible. And Stephen had offered his own help. So Ciara shouldn't have worried about his relationship with his wife. Since he had gone to the meeting first, he knew what he was doing. Ciara's musings were interrupted by a tense conversation at a neighboring table. A customer and a waiter were having an argument. I'm sorry, but your card doesn't fit, the waiter said kindly but sternly. What do you mean it doesn't fit? Try again, the customer answered fearfully. I have tried 3 times. It doesn't fit. So, then, your machine does not work. The machine is fine. The other cards are accepted. But wait, what am I supposed to do? I don't have any cash. Try a wire transfer. If I could, I'd offer it myself. I don't have internet on my phone either. You're putting me in an impossible position. I'm sorry, but according to regulations, we have to call the police in such cases. What's 500 rubles? The police? Are you kidding me? Absolutely not. That's the rules. But let me give you my passport as collateral or my cell phone, and I'll go get the cash. I'm sorry, but that's not allowed. Chiara rarely allowed herself to eavesdrop on other people's conversations. But here the scene was unfolding too close to her, and she became a listener willy-nilly. Moreover, at one point in the argument with the waiter, the customer's voice seemed very familiar to her. Or rather, not the voice, but the intonation so slightly theatrical. Chiara tried to remember where she could have heard those intonations, but nothing came to mind. So she gave in to curiosity and turned around to face the conflicted table. One glance at the customer was enough. Her classmate Noah Salvador's card wasn't working. Chiara didn't wait for the waiter to start calling the police. She got up and walked over to a neighboring table. "Wait, don't call the police," she said quietly to the waiter. "I'm paying for the young man's order." "What?" Salvador didn't immediately realize what was going on. He frantically looked for numbers in the phone book, choosing whom to ask to transfer the money. He didn't even notice that his classmate had come to the table. Then Noah looked up and saw Chiara. "Chiara, where did you happen to be here from?" Chiara smiled back and put her card to the machine. The classmates decided to leave this ill-fated cafe as soon as possible. "Listen, I don't even know how to thank you," Noah said, walking along the sidewalk with Chiara. "Come on. We're not strangers after all. You better tell me how you live." "I live boring. I work as a junior engineer at our chemical plant." "And you?" "I'm not far off either. I sell clothes." You see how much hope they had in us at school? It's all nonsense. You can't tell at school who you can and can't get your hopes up for. And you and I weren't great, let's face it. "Well, you're right about the curriculum," Noah grinned. Noah grinned. We weren't the only ones who paid attention to us in the curriculum, unlike the other one. Salvador immediately understood the meaning of Chiara's clarification. The fact was that Noah for Ciara and Ciara for Noah 15 years ago had become the first high school sweethearts. The whole class had watched their relationship develop, but developed was too loud a word. From the outside, it seemed more like the relationship was standing still and not moving anywhere. Noah and Ciara knew how they felt about each other, but they did nothing about it. They were very timid. No matter how much their classmates tried to push them towards each other, no way. For a whole year, the relationship was in limbo, until Chiara changed school for family reasons. After that, he and Noah saw each other only a few times at reunions, and Salvador even tried to start some kind of communication with Chiara, but that didn't lead to anything. On a personal level, we certainly shone with our indecision. Noah corrected his former classmate. The whole class laughed at us, not laughed at us, but envied us. Oh, of course they were jealous, Ciara smiled. But I think I've changed during this time. I've become much more determined. With girls and how? Any luck? Married? No, just practicing for now. But I mean only very quick relationships so far. You didn't get married either? Not yet. But hopefully there will be a wedding very soon. Until a couple hours ago I doubted it, but things seem to be getting better now. You're not 5 minutes away from being wife, Noah said a little sadly and looked at Chiara. She remembered that look from high school. It seemed to her as if those 15 years didn't even exist for Salvador. Still the same 8th grade. He still feels something for Ciara. And she tells him she's getting married soon. If that were the case, Noah would have the exact same look. Yeah, if everything goes well, of course. Is there any reason to doubt it? But, there are certain circumstances. You don't trust your future husband? No, that has nothing to do with it. Okay, well, I'm just being honest. I'm sorry it was an unnecessary question. Even your number. Do you think that's a good idea? Ciara asked, perplexed. No, you must have misunderstood me. I'd like to wire you the money for the cafe. You paid for me. Oh, forget it. But it would be a real inconvenience. Okay, I'll let you know. Ciara gave her number to Noah. They said their goodbyes and left. Ciara went to her house. She didn't want to go back to Eugene yet. Why she needed that extra 24 hours to think about it, she didn't understand. But something was keeping her from returning soon. Probably the deep trauma Amelie was systematically inflicting. If individually the attacks of a potential mother-in-law could be tolerated and forgotten, Then altogether they accumulated into one big psychological trauma. Tonight's quarrel was the last straw. So for at least a night she needed to sleep alone to recover from the incident. The only thing that surprised her a little was the phone was silent. Still, Ciara had thought that Eugene would start calling her immediately after she left. But he didn't. Even on messengers, there wasn't a single message from Eugene, despite the difficult situation. His natural restraint found a way to show itself. However, Ciara was able to find an excuse for this inaction as well. She decided that at first Eugene just didn't want to get under Ciara's hot hand and thought it was better to wait until she cooled down a bit. And then he had simply gotten a call from Stephen, informing him of Ciara's decision to return tomorrow and asking him not to bother her for that 24 hours. With those thoughts, Ciara calmed down and finalized her decision to come back tomorrow. Everything turned out just as Ciara had envisioned, even a little better. The next morning, Eugene called her himself, apologized for the past incident, and asked her to come back. Ciara immediately did just that. Throughout the wedding preparations, to Ciara's delight, Amélie had not made any contact at all. They occasionally called Eugene, but even in those private conversations they didn't seem to mention Ciara. Apparently Stephen had managed to do some serious work with her. Ciara was quietly happy about it and was busy with the wedding arrangements. She was embarrassed to remember that she could have deprived herself of such happiness by simply running away from Eugene. It was a good thing that the wise Stephen had gotten there in time. There was no telling how things would have turned out if he had not, with his usual calmness and prudence, taken up the matter. The wedding was one day away, Ciara's most nervous moment of preparation. The phone rang. She didn't pick it up right away. The problems associated with the ill-fitting dress seemed much more important to her. But soon the phone rang again, and she did pick it up. Amélie popped up on the screen in large letters. Ciara sighed heavily and took the call. "Hello, Ciara, hello," Amélie asked in a voice that wasn't her usual one. She usually managed to give out even her greeting words in a particularly unpleasant tone, but this time the tone was calm and even a bit timid. "Yes, Amélie, hello. I'd like to talk to you, but please don't be frightened. It's not what you think." Amélie felt exactly Ciara's first reaction to her call. "I'd like to talk." All the previous conversations flashed before Ciara's eyes, and for a moment she had time to think that it would start all over again, but if it wasn't going to be the same as always. No, I told you it's not what you think. I promise I won't say a bad word to you. I just really want to talk to you. I think it's better to do it before the wedding. If that's the way you feel, where do you want to meet? Or maybe we could do it over the phone. It wouldn't be over the phone. I'd like to meet at a coffee shop downtown. It's called Lavender. I'll call you a cab. No, that's okay. I know where it is. I don't need a cab. I'll be there in an hour. Okay, then I'll be there in an hour. Ciara was extremely surprised. It was the first time she'd ever heard Amélie's calm voice. And where was she being called to? To the same place where Stephen had brought her back to normal earlier. It's a coincidence, isn't it? After all, he usually held his family dinners in nice, fancy restaurants, and they had chosen the same modest establishment for their moments of privacy. I wonder if they realize it themselves. An hour later, Ciara was at the place. Amélie was running a little late. Ciara chose the same table where she and Stephen were sitting and waited. Literally 5 minutes later, Amélie walked into the room. "Oh, Ciara, you picked my favorite table," she said cheerfully and sat down across from me. "This must be where you and Stephen usually relax, right?" Ciara asked, as if she wanted to check her hunch. "No, we usually vacation in more solid places, you know. And here I like to come alone, and I don't think he knows about it," Amélie answered. "Wow," Ciara said in surprise. She didn't know what surprised her the most. On the one hand, it was strange to hear that Amélie preferred a modest place for privacy. Ciara had always thought the main thing about their pairing was Amélie and her love of local pathos. But here, talking about the more respectable places, she made a face as if she was sick of all those expensive restaurants and was only thinking how she could escape to some humble cafeteria. On the other hand, the coincidence with Stephen seemed even more surprising to Ciara. She had a thought that it was her husband who had told Amelie about the conversation they had had, and that was the reason for the choice of location for tonight's meeting. But as it turned out, it was really a coincidence. I guess the years together have something to do with taste and preferences in non-obvious things. You must be a little surprised, Amelie said, as if reading Ciara's mind. You must have thought that I'm just a pretentious aunt who cares more about the price tag than anything else in the world. But no, sometimes I want to be modest, you see. Lately I've been thinking more and more about how bored I am with everything. Many years ago I invented the image of a rich diva. In fact, it was never her. Still understand, a girl from a poor family, from a deep province, suddenly finds herself in the circle of golden youth. Anyone's head will be blown off by talk of good perfume and travel to Paris. And as a result, a bouquet of complexes in addition. Stephen has always been sympathetic to this, only sometimes expressing his dislike of what is going on. Though he should love all this agility and bohemia much more than I do. He's one of those golden youths. And I thought that since I had become a Salvador, I had to live up to it. That's how you can rework this text. The outfits, the house, the restaurants, I got used to it all over time. But it wasn't just about material possessions. No, I wanted my loved ones to meet certain standards too. And of course, the most important person to me was Eugene. I felt it was my duty to find the best things in life for him. And what does the best mean in my distorted view? The richest and most expensive, of course. And here just the daughter of the neighbors grew up, but literally everything worked out perfectly. Only thing is, our Eugene took after his father. I'm such an idiot. I should have taken after Stephen. But no, I had to satisfy my need for pathos. Oh, come on, why would you do that? Ciara felt sorry for Amelie. She never thought she could feel pity for this man. But once Amelie had shared a little of her revelations, everything changed at once. No, don't feel sorry for me, Amelie said. You have every right to hate me. I just want you to understand the nature of my initial attitude toward you. All those complexes and rich prejudices were very repulsive. When Eugene told you, all my ideas of right living collapsed in an instant. The deep complexes that prevented me from accepting you turned into outright boorishness. Although in fact many years ago I was in the same position as you. Or maybe, Amelie wondered, there's nothing wrong with me, Ciara asked. I was just thinking, maybe I was trying to save you. I'm sorry. What do you mean? Well, I just didn't want you to make the same mistakes I made subconsciously. You have the same potential to pick up those same complexes and become a petty woman like me. Although I'm not looking for excuses. You're completely different and will never, thankfully, become like me. No, you're absolutely right, Ciara said. I too have been and continue to be uncomfortable with wealth. And maybe if you hadn't decided to tell your story, it would have happened all over again, Ciara said. It's good that you realize that. I don't know if you forgive me for all these cruel conversations we've had. I don't think I could forgive myself. In fact, if I were you, I'd run away or give Eugene an ultimatum. It was either me or your mom. I had that thought, Ciara grinned. But I thought it was too harsh. By the way, how did Stephen's mom take you in? Amelie turned to the window and stared out for 15 seconds. Let's just say it wasn't the best experience I can give you, she finally said. Stephen's mom was a bossy woman, like me, only unlike me. She'd been rich all her life. I don't know how the Salvador family managed to make a good fortune during the Soviet era. Stephen's father was a prominent party figure, but that wasn't a guarantee of success back then. Anyway, it doesn't matter how. But Stephen's parents lived much richer than the average Soviet citizen. It really surprised me, Amelie continued. I used to walk around their apartment and dacha with my mouth open, imagining how I would have foreign clothes and real French perfume. You probably wouldn't understand that now. There is everything from every country on the shelves. You can buy it all you want. It is there, but not everyone can buy it, Ciara corrected. And the quality is not always original. So there is a choice, of course, but not everyone can use this choice. Well, you see, again this vacuum of rich life appears, said Amelie. Apparently in my world everyone can buy everything. I guess that's okay. You don't have to know all the realities. Yes, I do, Ciara argued. Sometimes that ignorance can lead to the most unpleasant consequences, like you lashing out at me. Okay, let's get back to your question, Emily said. As you've probably guessed by now, Stephen's mother didn't accept me either. Only she never said so openly. Then how did you know she didn't accept you? Ciara asked. You know, it happens when you walk into a house and you feel with every fiber of your being that you're hated, Amelie said. People don't have to express their hatred out loud. It's just a look, an intonation, something like that. Moreover, at some point Stephen stopped calling me to his house, trying to make sure that his mother and I never crossed paths. His parents didn't even come to our wedding, she continued. Stephen said they had some very important things to do, but I knew right away. They never accepted me into their family. Stephen's mom had passed away pretty early in life, and we never got a chance to explain ourselves. On the other hand, you didn't fight with her, did you? Ciara tried to reassure me. Yes, she never raised her voice at me, Emily replied. But, you know, sometimes it's better to have all your emotions confronted in person than to have them stored somewhere deep inside. I think that her early departure may have something to do with the fact that she kept it all to herself, never let her emotions out. But who knows? Maybe I was just making it up as I went along. Are you blaming yourself for your mother-in-law's early death? Ciara wondered. No, I don't blame myself, but I think I caused her a lot of distress. Most importantly, hidden distress. She was just very fond of Stephen, so she didn't want to talk about it openly. And I must have been a bad mother to act so rudely. In the end, you made the right choice, Ciara said. We were able to have a human conversation after all. Explain ourselves. It's a lot better than keeping it to yourself. You did better than Stephen's mom? But what could I have driven you to? Emily sighed. But it's all right. You didn't drive me to anything. I'm not the weakest of characters, you know. I've been hurt by your barbs, of course, Ciara said. But it's all right, I put up with it. Except for the last time. And then I did the wrong thing. I should have acted right away, told Eugene and Stephen. I told you I didn't want to upset your relationship with Eugene, so I kept quiet, she continued. And about Stephen, I hardly knew him. Before that unexpected conversation, as it turned out, I hardly knew him either. No, I mean, I knew he was a good psychologist, but not that good. He'd built a solid business from scratch. I was involved, of course, but more as a doer, just doing what he told me to do. Didn't you say that Stephen was one of the golden youth? Ciara asked. Yes, he was. Amelie nodded. But what kind of business in the Soviet Union? He created his own companies, his own. And not like many people back then, he bought a factory for cheap and started to cut money from it. He rented premises, bought equipment, all by himself, with initial capital. Maybe he had it easier than others, of course. But nobody gave him $1 million. His father took the collapse of the Union hard, so he was skeptical of Stephen's idea to create his own enterprise. Almost didn't help. Is that what I'm getting at? Amelie took a sip of coffee. Entrepreneurs, businessmen are a special breed. Oh, I've seen a lot of them over the years. Some of them make me sick. Some bad, some good. But they all have something in common: grit, speed, toughness. But if you look at Stephen from the outside, there's none of that. Not even just from the outside. At home, he's a harmless man who I would never trust to run a big company. I'm much more of an entrepreneur than he is, by the way. Amelie smiled. But no. After all, the company has risen, and in the most difficult time for the country. Not just raised, but developed and successfully managed it to this day. How, you may ask, how can one be a successful entrepreneur with such a character? I did not immediately begin to think about it. You see, when you live with a person for many years, you don't notice their characteristic features, Amelie continued. You take everything as normal. But at every meeting with entrepreneurs, at every business lunch, I felt uncomfortable. I just didn't like those rich guys. But with my Stephen, it was always so nice, so relaxed. That's when I started to notice that he was different from the usual entrepreneurs. I forgot about it for a while. Different, so what I thought. That's why I married him and not someone else. But with each new meeting, with each new acquaintance, eccentric businessman, I thought again about Stephen's character. And then the truth finally began to dawn on me. Stephen has some kind of psychological skill that helps him solve all business problems. Amelie paused, taking a sip of coffee. At first it seemed to me that this is only a small part of the success of his company. After all, I was in charge of a lot of the negotiations. But as time went on, I realized that Stephen's silent, modest participation was a much bigger part of our success than my loud and flashy negotiations. Like a spider, he quietly weaves his web, graciously invites his competitors, partners, and subordinates into his web, envelops them, and then does whatever he wants with them, Amelie said emotionally. Somehow he manages to find weaknesses, pain points, or just the most important thing in some issue. Stephen quietly presses on these points and gets the desired result. I thought at the time that he only did that in business. In life, he's quieter than water, lower than grass. He's unpretentious, he doesn't demand anything. He just doesn't need to show his psychological skills. But that's not the case. It was only in the last month that I realized that he had been using those skills throughout our life together. It's just that Stephen did it so neatly that I didn't notice. And anyway, I guess he was okay with my hot temper. That's why he wasn't very active in fixing our relationship. After all, marriage is not a business. There are other processes at work, Amelie said. How did you notice it in the end? What happened? In the last month, something that had never happened in your entire life together. You happened, she grinned. But Eugene and I started our relationship much earlier. Yes, but Stephen had stayed out of it all this time. And then he decided to clean up the mess. That's when I realized. Why did Stephen decide to interfere? Ciara wondered. Oh, I don't know. It's so unlike him. Usually he's separate and Eugene's personal life is separate. I think the answer is obvious, Amelie shrugged. He just felt sorry for you. Realized you were suffering because of me. He waited, and at the most decisive moment he acted like that. What did he do besides talk to me? He had 2 conversations with me, calmly, without raising his voice. He carefully explained everything. After that, my worldview completely changed. I have never worked with psychologists, but I think people experience something similar after a long therapy with professional psychologists. He brought me back down to earth and explained what I looked like from the outside. And in 2 conversations, Stephen managed to change your personality? Ciara asked incredulously, as you can see, only not quite like that. Amelie shook her head. He didn't change my personality. Stephen helped me to shed the tinsel that hung over my real identity, those awful rich man complexes and prejudices. She took a sip of coffee. The first conversation happened after you ran away. I don't know what clicked with him, but that evening of that day, Stephen sat down with me and bluntly told me he wanted to talk. He told me how he'd talk to you, what a positive girl you really are. And then he started asking simple leading questions, the answers to which made me realize how stupid it was to act like that. After that, I decided to give you a break, no calling, no texting, avoiding seeing you. I thought that you hated me and would not agree to even a normal, calm conversation, such as we have now. And last night we had a second conversation. He reminded me about our personal history, about my relationship with his mother. Amelie continued. Yesterday I finally realized how wrong I was about you. And I decided that we should end this ridiculous feud before the wedding, and as openly as possible. Explaining to you everything that I realized about myself not so long ago. I hope I've done that. And I hope even more that you'll forgive me. She looked at Ciara. Of course I will, she nodded. You are a very strong man. Only strong people are able to change so dramatically in such a short time and at the same time, looking in the eyes, apologize. Strong people don't torture their fiancé for such a long time. Amelie waved her hand. Did you have a reason to do it? Well then, let's put it behind us, Ciara said. Although the last thing I really don't want is for you to repeat my mistakes. The most important thing in a marriage, in any marriage, and especially when it comes to any financial matters, is to stay yourself. Yeah, thanks for the warning. I more than understood. Amelie nodded. Good for you. Well, I won't keep you any longer. Get ready for tomorrow, for the great happiness that will come. Ciara said goodbye to Amelie and left the cafe. Outside, it was going to rain again. The people of the city were not lucky with the weather this summer. Ciara hailed a cab, sat in the back seat, and leaned against the window, thinking. The cab driver, seeing the pensive expression on her face, did not distract her with conversation, put on some quiet radio station and silently drove Kiara home. Ciara really had a lot to think about. It seemed like she should have been driving in bewilderment at the conversation that had taken place. After all, how was it possible that Eugene's mother, who had been driving her for over a year, turned out to be not only a subtle and sensitive person, but also found the strength to apologize and explain everything to Kiara? But it wasn't the sudden transformation of roles and attitudes towards her mom that she was thinking about. She felt like she'd just been chatting with a friend she'd known for years. Absolutely the same feelings. Ciara trusted Amelie completely, didn't doubt the sincerity of her every word. Everything was so ordinary, so peaceful, that she forgot all the hardships this woman had put her through. Someone had erased all the negativity from her memories of Amelie. And now Kiara was just driving and enjoying the moment. She didn't even have to think about tomorrow's wedding. She was already happy. "I'm sorry you're so thoughtful," the cab driver broke the silence. "Is something important coming up?" "Yes, you're very clever," Ciara smiled. "Something important indeed." "Well, what could be important for a young, beautiful girl? A wedding, a divorce." "Still a wedding," she nodded. "Oh, today I'm especially perceptive." The cab driver praised himself. "Are you a little nervous?" "That's right. It's better to be nervous beforehand, so that there won't be any problems later." He began to tell an incredibly interesting story of his life, which Ciara stopped listening to at the second sentence. It wasn't until the end of the story that she came to her senses. "So you should always be on your guard," the cab driver warned emotionally. "Always, especially before a wedding. There will always be those who want to upset her. So girl, I hope that you will not repeat my mistakes and will not trust everyone at once. We're here now, by the way." The car was indeed pulling into the courtyard of Eugene and Kiara's house. After paying the driver, she went up to the house. Eugene was gone, so Ciara was once again alone with her thoughts. She couldn't remember what the shrewd cab driver had been talking about, but his last words crashed into her head. Maybe she really was in a hurry to trust Amelie. What if this was some last-ditch, multi-pronged scheme on the part of her future mother-in-law? Or rather, if her scheme succeeded, she would never become a mother-in-law. Ciara said to herself, "Stop. Why am I so nervous? Some cab driver said something stupid and I believed it right away. No, you need to calm down and ignore all sorts of insignificant things. It was all nerves." Ciara shamed herself and continued to prepare for the wedding. Tomorrow needed to be planned once more. She and Eugene decided to do away with hackneyed traditions, like the groom not seeing the bride before the wedding in her dress and other classic superstitions. They decided to go to the registry office together and then modestly go to celebrate in a restaurant. They did not want a lot of guests, only Ciara's parents, Eugene's mom, a few friends and girlfriends. It seemed that there should not be any difficulties with the organization. The only thing was that Ciara was worried whether she would have time to go to the beauty salon before the registry office. But there much depended on the speed of the master, not on her. The next day, Ciara went to the salon even earlier than she had planned. She called the master in advance and clarified whether there was free time. Ciara had been to this salon literally several times in her life. Usually she solved her appearance by herself. She did her hair, manicure and pedicure with her own hands. At first, she just didn't have money for all these masters, and then, even when Eugene and she had the opportunity to go anywhere, the habit of doing everything herself remained. And it must be said, Ciara was pretty good at it. So there was no need for beauty salons. But the wedding was a special day, and Ciara decided to trust the hands of a master. They chose a hairstyle together, and the girl began to work on her hair. Ciara watched her hands carefully, ready to stop in time, for example, if she wanted to cut off too much hair. After a couple minutes, she calmed down a bit, relaxed, and stopped this total control. Ciara decided that the master knew his business and there was no need to keep glaring at her. But it wasn't long before she had to tense up again. The phone rang in her pocket. At first, she didn't want to pick up the phone, not wanting to interrupt the master's work process. All the more reason for her to have the call on silent. The ringing stopped. Ciara had time to exhale, but then the phone rang again. "If anything, you can answer it. It won't interfere with our work," said the girl master kindly, who, as it turned out, also heard those quiet calls. "Okay," Kiara replied, pulling her phone out of her pocket and taking the call. "Hello, speaking." "Ciara, good afternoon." A rough male voice sounded in the receiver. It sounded as if it had been changed on purpose in a computer program. "Who is this?" Kiara asked without saying hello. She immediately sensed something wrong. "It's, shall we say, a well-wisher." "Who? I don't understand." "A well-wisher. I want you to have a good life. Stop this circus. Identify yourself immediately." "Calm down, Ciara. There's no need to be angry. My job is to help you. So please listen to me and don't hang up on me. It's for your own happiness." "I know what I need for my own happiness. If you're not going to introduce yourself, I'm hanging up. Have a nice day." Ciara thought she'd gotten a scam call and was about to hang up. "Wait, it's about your wedding," shouted the man into the phone, and it worked. Ciara didn't bother to press the reset button. "Speak then?" Only clearly, quickly, and without idiotic mystery. "Okay, I'll be as direct as possible. You need to cancel the wedding immediately because the man you want to marry is not who he says he is." "What the hell are you talking about? Who the hell are you?" "I can't reveal my identity yet because it would be worse for both of us. Eugene is a traitor and a cheater. He's been living a double life and lying to you for years. So stop it right now." "On what grounds am I supposed to believe you?" "On any basis. I'm telling the truth. And tonight, if you don't cancel the wedding, you'll see it for yourself. Eugene will cheat on you during the ceremony." "Look, that's ridiculous. It's not even funny. Couldn't you think of anything more plausible? Well, don't believe me, but you're going to regret it today. Right now, canceling the wedding is still within your power. Right now, you can avoid tomorrow's embarrassment and prevent the rest of your life from being traumatized. Please believe me." "How do you even envision this?" "I have to cancel my wedding because some scammer called me and talked trash about my fiancé. But it's still your choice. Yeah, it sounds risky, but trust me, it's worth it. I mean, it's going to be late tonight. You can't wash away the shame. You have a few hours to think about it. I warned you." "That's it. I can't hear it anymore. Goodbye." Ciara ended the call and threw the phone in front of the mirror. She looked at the girl master. She calmly continued working, pretending nothing was happening. But it was clear from her eyes that she was a little shocked at what was happening. Kiara urgently needed someone to share her impressions of the call with, so she was the first to speak. "I don't understand how this is even possible. A stranger calls, introduces himself to me and tries to upset my wedding. But what the hell is that? So no mood will remain." "Don't worry," the master reassured Ciara. "The closer an important event is, the more unnecessary problems will arise. Maybe it was a secret admirer called you, who does not want you to marry. Or, for example, the former revenge." "Come on, how could I have secret admirers? And anyway, do you know how many years ago my previous relationship ended? I think all the exes have long since forgotten me. I mean, maybe some scammers will call again, demanding money to make the wedding a success. Maybe they're scammers, although I've never heard of such elaborate schemes." "Okay, let's see." The master finished her work and Ciara drove home. In the cab, she was still as pensive as yesterday. Only this time the cab driver was able to keep silent for the rest of the ride. Ciara thought about that mysterious phone call. She carefully chased one thought away, but it came back again and again. It was the thought of Amelie's involvement in the call. Hadn't it all been part of her big plan yesterday? To put her guard down, to draw suspicion away from herself, and then set this nonsense in motion today. There was no reason for Ciara to really suspect Amelie. She forced herself to believe it was just her prejudices and nothing more. For one thing, the scheme was too complicated. Amelie could come up with something much simpler and more axe-headed. She doesn't need to hire people, bust up a comedy act in a cafe to issue an ultimatum, or have a tough face-to-face talk with Ciara. And secondly, Amelie was already very convincing yesterday. Ciara had worked in sales for a long time, and was good at recognizing when a person was faking it, and when they really, for example, liked a certain thing. Amelie, of course, is not a jacket buyer. But the principle is the same. Yesterday, when she talked about moments from her youth, about Stephen's mom, she had real tears in her eyes. Yes, she was able to hold them back. But Ciara saw those tears. So Amelie's fake version of the story seemed pretty wild to her. The cab driver drove her home quickly. Ciara arrived with plenty of time to spare. Eugene had just woken up. His mood was good. "You look gorgeous," he said to Ciara as he looked at her new hairstyle. "Thank you," the bride thanked Eugene and hugged him. She hugged him silently for a few minutes. "Is everything okay, Ciara?" Eugene asked, looking at Ciara's silence. Yes, everything is fine," she answered him in an unsure tone. "Are you worried about the wedding?" Eugene was not convinced by Ciara's words. "A little. Probably more than I should be, though. I know I'm nervous, too. I mean, we're advanced people, you and me. It's just a few drops of ink on a passport. Why should we worry about it? We should just think of the wedding as a celebration. Enjoy it." "You make a good point," Ciara said and sighed. "What's wrong with you?" Eugene hugged his fiancée even tighter. "Are you sure it's just the wedding that's bothering you? Nothing else has happened?" "How's Mom?" "Nothing," Ciara answered. "I had a heart-to-heart talk with her last night." "She didn't call again?" "No, I don't mean my mom, I mean yours." "How is she? Does she have time to come to the wedding from the village? How's she doing?" "Mine's fine. She'll make it. She was wondering how you're doing." Unlike Amelie, Ciara's mom took to Eugene immediately. She didn't have a problem with her future son-in-law. She trusted her daughter's choice. "Well, that's good. So everyone will be together today, for the first time since we've been together. Or is that what you're worried about?" You could say that, Ciara answered, not quite lying to Eugene. She was of course more worried about the call. But Ciara wasn't forgetting about her mom's upcoming meeting with Amelie either. There was no telling how it might end. Her mom was a simple woman. She might say something to Amelie if she started to show her temper. She could only hope that Amelie's transformation from yesterday would spread to the wedding festivities and everything would go quietly and calmly. Ciara was sure of her mother she would never provoke a conflict, but she could react. "I think everything will be fine. People are adults, they understand everything. Dad will be there if anything happens. He'll keep an eye on everyone, won't he?" Eugene grinned, hinting at his mom's complicated nature. "Yeah, that's comforting." Stephen's presence really did give Ciara a guarantee of a quiet evening. The man had recently demonstrated exceptional wisdom and ability to resolve difficult conflicts. "Okay, as long as we're all good. What's wrong? Why do you have such a sad look on your face, Eugene?" Ciara stared intently into her fiancé's eyes. "Tell me honestly, you're not going to leave me for anyone, are you?" "What's the matter, Ciara?" "No, I'm not." Eugene was a little taken aback by the unexpected question from Ciara. "And in the whole time we've been together, you haven't cheated on me with anyone?" she asked. "I haven't," Eugene answered. "Listen, I'm a little scared by your questions. What's wrong?" "Nothing," Ciara hugged Eugene again. "If you're so faithful, nothing happened. Everything's fine." They sat like that until they left for the registry office. Ciara had the thought of telling Eugene about the call, but she didn't dare to do it. It looked too stupid from the outside, and not just from the outside. Ciara herself thought the situation was as stupid as possible. Telling Eugene would only spoil his mood. And at a wedding there should be at least one person with a festive mood. Moreover, even if she made the most unrealistic assumption and thought that the man calling wasn't lying and that Eugene was really the last scoundrel, he would never admit it, and will deny it anyway. So initiating Eugene into the mysterious caller seemed to Ciara from all sides a wrong decision. She thought the best thing to do right now would be to forget about the call. Yes, it wouldn't be possible to completely get rid of the intrusive thoughts. One way or another, the subject would come up for her during the celebration. But at least try worth, especially right at the wedding. And it will turn out to finally make sure that this call is a fiction of some fraudsters. After all, according to their claims, Eugene was supposed to cheat at the wedding. That seemed to her the most delusional of all the information she'd gotten from John Doe. At a wedding, the groom is almost always in the public eye. Why would he cheat right there? Even if Eugene was a pathological cheater, why wouldn't he wait a bit? And how would the caller know that? Anyway, the more Ciara thought about the call, the more she found it absurd. And she calmed down. The long-awaited hour of the trip to the registry office came. There everything went modestly, tastefully, and without incident. Ciara and Eugene were solemnly declared husband and wife, and now they were on their way to the restaurant to celebrate the wedding. The newlyweds didn't bother with too much pomp and order limousines to the venue. They were driven by Stephen and Emily to the restaurant. Ciara went into the ladies' room with her already established mother-in-law. "Ciara, congratulations again, and I apologize," Amelie said kindly. "You are now officially part of our extended family." "Thank you," Ciara replied just as kindly. "There is no need to apologize. A new page in our relationship has begun. Who remembers the old, you know?" Wise beyond her years, Ciara. Amelie noted and went out into the hall. Ciara was left with a little makeup touch-up. During the whole event at the registry office and on the way to the restaurant, she never once remembered about the mysterious phone call. Now, the conversation with Amelie reminded Ciara of her unfounded suspicions about her mother-in-law. Now she was completely convinced that Amelie had nothing to do with it. What did she care anyway? Ciara also went out into the hall and took her place next to the groom. The celebration went on quietly. Chiara's mom quickly found common language with Amelie, and now they were sitting together and discussing the children. The first hour of the celebration passed, then the second. The waiters only had time to bring new bottles of wine and strong drinks. Despite the high degree of fun, there were no conflicts. The news of the wedding had reached the more distant relatives of Ciara and Eugene. You bet, because Ciara posted the wedding photo in one of the social networks. After that, the unexpected calls from various friends of the past began. Ciara and Eugene's 3 siblings had to leave the table outside or into quiet areas of the restaurant to be able to hear the caller. At some point, Ciara got tired of this and sat with the phone right at the table. Just then, Eugene got another call and went somewhere from behind the table. A minute later, the phone rang at Ciara's desk as well. She picked it up, saw another unspecified number, and pressed accept the call. "Hello, Ciara, did you recognize me? Is it hard to hear?" A rough male voice sounded in the receiver. "Who is this?" "I called you this morning and warned you about something." "Oh, you again," Ciara sobered up. "What do you want?" "I don't need anything anymore. All I could do was warn you. Didn't you listen? Now all you have to do is reap the consequences of your mistakes." "Cut the crap." Ciara left the table and went to a quieter corner. "Can you be traced by your phone number? Do you even know about that?" "Oh, Ciara, you're a naive girl," the stranger grinned. "And to make sure that I'm not lying, you only need to put your hand in the pocket of your husband's jacket. Anyway, you know everything. Call me, please, on this number. Have a good day." The man hung up. Ciara turned around and slowly walked to the table. Eugene still hadn't returned. As luck would have it, he had gone out to talk in just his shirt and left his jacket hanging on the chair. Ciara reluctantly sat down in her seat, looked around, and carefully slipped her hand into Eugene's jacket pocket. There she fumbled for some paper. The girl looked around again and pulled it out. The paper was neatly folded several times and smelled of perfume. Ciara put her hands under the table and unfolded the note, trying to keep a nonchalant expression on her face. The note had only a few words written on it in good handwriting: 07000 in the small banquet room. Waiting. Ciara looked at her watch. It showed 6:55. She wasn't quite sure what was even going on. It all seemed like some kind of idiotic prank. Maybe someone really decided to play a prank on me. Ciara soothed herself. But Eugene knows how much I don't like pranks. Oh, I don't like it. Ciara got up from the table and walked around the room. She knew this restaurant had 2 banquet rooms. The note was probably referring to just the second, smaller banquet room. Ciara didn't immediately decide to head there. It still felt very much like some kind of joke. Maybe she shouldn't fall for it then. But on the other hand, if someone with a dubious sense of humor decided to play a prank on the wedding, why not play along with Eugene? Ciara still had hope that she just wouldn't find that small banquet hall. But no, her gaze traitorously stopped just outside the small banquet hall sign. She glanced at her watch once more. It took her about 5 minutes to think about it. Then Ciara carefully opened the door and peered inside. The room was in disrepair, with chairs on the tables and decorations lying on the floor. Toward one of those decorations, some girl, most likely a waitress, was clinging passionately to her newfound husband. Ciara went numb. That's it. That's it. That's enough," Eugene quietly muttered, barely moving his tongue. Ciara watched in silence. "Oh, so there you are?" Amélie's joyful voice sounded. "We've been looking all over the restaurant for you. And here we are, a wedding without the newlyweds." The woman didn't have time to finish her sentence. She too had looked into the unfortunate room. Ciara turned around and quickly ran to the exit. Amélie tried to catch up with her. Eugene finally realized that he had been spotted. He jumped up, but only managed to walk a few steps and collapsed. "Ciara, my girl, I beg you. Wait," her mother-in-law urged her, catching up with her at the door of the restaurant. "Don't, please. You were right. Then I have no place in your family." "Stop it." "What are you saying?" "What am I saying? Why don't you check with your son? What a fool I was. How long has he been playing me for?" "Wait, give me just 1 minute," Amélie pleaded. "I can imagine what you're feeling right now, but I'm just as confused as you are. I don't think we should jump to conclusions." "Amélie, I understand your desire to protect your son, but how can you jump to conclusions? You saw it all yourself." "I did," Amélie nodded. "But this is nothing like my son. Let's do this. Will you give Stephen and me at least 12 hours? Now you promise me that in those 12 hours you won't do anything stupid and you won't run away. We'll take Eugene back to our place. You saw the state he's in."
"Okay," Ciara agreed grudgingly. "But I don't know what will change in the meantime. At least we'll try to figure it out."
"Don't worry, there's no shame yet, except for you and me. No one's seen Eugene. I'll go back and tell the guests that the newlyweds have decided to celebrate at home alone. We'll try to get Eugene out of here without being seen. You go home. But again, please don't do anything stupid." "I'll try," Ciara said, turning around and walking toward the house in her wedding dress. "Where are you going?" Amélie stopped her. "Let me call you a cab." Her mother-in-law called Ciara a cab and sent her home. Ciara got there in a semi-fainting state. For her, everything that was happening was like a terrible dream that would not end. She collapsed on the couch and sighed heavily. Ciara stared at the ceiling silently, tears streaming from her eyes. She didn't even have the strength to change her clothes. She lay like that for several hours until she was awakened by the intercom ringing. Ciara didn't want to go open the door. She didn't want to do anything at all, but it wouldn't stop ringing. So then she forced herself to get up and open the door. Amélie and Stephen walked into the apartment. "Ciara, you have your laptop next to you. Is it busy?" my father-in-law asked. "Yeah, it was lying around here somewhere." Ciara opened the laptop and handed it to Stephen. "Great. Now you're going to see something." He inserted a small flash drive into the laptop and turned on the video. It turned out to be the restaurant's security footage. It showed Eugene standing and talking on the phone. At some point he felt sick, leaned against the wall and tried to go outside. At that point, the waitress stopped Eugene and asked him to come with her. She actually walked him up to the empty banquet room and laid him down on a couch. The waitress then stood at the front door and glanced back and forth at the next room, then at her phone. After reading some message, she stood by the door for a while longer, and then approached Eugene. He awkwardly tried to push her away and mumbled something to himself. Then the waitress forcefully tried to kiss him. At the same moment, Ciara looked into the room. "So that's what this is all about," she said with rounded eyes. "I told you we'd figure it out." Amélie summarized the video. "Wait, so Eugene was drugged? How's he feeling right now? We should call the police, request an evaluation." "I don't think we're going to need the police here," Stephen told her. Eugene is sleeping it off at our house right now. His pulse is fine. His blood pressure's fine. It's okay. He needs his sleep. I did the forensics myself. I just picked up Eugene's glass. I wouldn't mistake this blend for anything. It's just wine and vodka. What do you mean, vodka? Ciara was surprised. We didn't even order vodka. Some waiter was diligently pouring Eugene a strong wine. Vodka it was. You, I saw, had regular wine, but Eugene, you know, he's not very good with booze. Wine and beer are fine, but anything stronger, his body can't take it. Apparently, the organizers of this performance did not know about such a reaction of Eugene and thought that he would just be tipsy and would fall for some girl. But our fighter fell asleep early. Fantastic. Ciara couldn't get over the shock. So the cameras don't show who was involved in the wine and vodka spiking. No, they didn't have cameras in the kitchen. There are cameras at the bar, but I couldn't get footage there. I could barely get these from the security guard in the lounge. It was the same waitress who poured Eugene's drink, Steven said. So we have to talk to that waitress, Ciara whispered. I'm not sure how they knew you'd get to the other room at the right time. No, it makes sense, Ciara told her mother-in-law about the 2 mysterious phone calls in the note. Listen, it's like a movie. Amie wondered, why didn't you tell Eugene everything at once? I didn't think it was so serious. I thought it was just some kind of fraud. I didn't want to ruin Eugene's mood over nothing. Ciara sighed. Yeah, Amelie nodded. I wonder what his reaction will be when he wakes up. I don't think it will be soon, Steven answered. Knowing some peculiarities of his body, he won't wake up until tomorrow morning. What are we going to do then? Ciara asked, confused. That's right. I suggest we finish what we started. Call your mysterious admirer. Tell him that you were wrong, and that you were convinced of what a traitor Eugene was. Thank him and ask him to meet you, preferably right away. Ciara understood, pulled out her phone, and did as Steven told her. The meeting was set for half an hour later in a nearby public garden. Amelie and Steven arrived there a little early, pretending to be a couple who decided to take a walk before going to bed. Ciara changed her clothes and went to the public garden 2 minutes before the appointed time. She saw a male figure walking towards her with a brisk gait. The stranger had his cap pulled low. It was impossible to tell who it was from afar. Why didn't you want to give me your phone number that time, Ciara? You wouldn't have learned so much, the man said cheerfully, and took off his cap. So it's you, Ciara exclaimed. Before her stood her former classmate Noah Salvador. I don't know how to thank you. No way. It's enough to go on a date with me. How did you get all that information about Eugene? Connections. Like the waitress at the restaurant where you work who can pour vodka into wine just in time. Ciara was slapped hard before she could finish. You used to be just an indecisive person, but now you've become even more vicious and pathetic. Suddenly, Ciara was approached by her father-in-law and mother-in-law. What, so this is the show organizer? Steven asked.
I see. But I think he could be prosecuted for slander. And if the actions with drinks are qualified as injury to health. Oh, I'm afraid he won't get off with a suspended sentence, he said.
Ciara, I'm sorry, Noah said pitifully. I just loved you all these years. I can't stand to see you, you bastard. Ciara turned away and looked at Steven and Amelie. Well, Ciara, I think this man's fate is in your hands, her mother-in-law said calmly. What am I supposed to do with him? Ciara sighed and turned to Noah again. Then that's it, get out of here. But if I see you anywhere even casually again, we will seek a criminal case. Do you understand? Yes, Noah answered obediently. He turned around and walked quickly towards the exit. Steven and Amelie drove Ciara to their family cottage. They chatted in the kitchen and mocked the previous day. As it turned out, the rest of the wedding guests had guessed nothing and continued to celebrate without the bride and groom. Eugene woke up the next day with a terrible hangover and huge memory lapses. He didn't even remember any of the waitresses. Ciara and her mother-in-law and father-in-law decided not to tell him anything. So unusually began a new family page in the life of a modest girl, Ciara.
Hello, Ciara, did you recognize me? Is it hard to hear? A rough male voice sounded in the receiver. Who is this? I called you this morning and warned you about something.
Oh, you again, Ciara sobered up. What do you want? I don't need anything anymore. All I could do was warn you. Didn't you listen? Now all you have to do is reap the consequences of your mistakes. Cut the crap. Ciara left the table and went to a quieter corner. Can you be traced by your phone number? Do you even know about that? Oh, Ciara, you're a naive girl, the stranger grinned. And to make sure that I'm not lying, you only need to put your hand in the pocket of your husband's jacket. Anyway, you know everything. Call me, please, on this number. Have a good day. The man hung up. Ciara turned around and slowly walked to the table. Eugene still hadn't returned. As luck would have it, he had gone out to talk in just his shirt and left his jacket hanging on the chair. Ciara reluctantly sat down in her seat, looked around, and carefully slipped her hand into Eugene's jacket pocket. There she fumbled for some paper. The girl looked around again and pulled it out. The paper was neatly folded several times and smelled of perfume. Ciara put her hands under the table and unfolded the note, trying to keep a nonchalant expression on her face. The note had only a few words written on it in good handwriting: 07000 in the small banquet room. Waiting. Ciara looked at her watch. It showed 6:55. She wasn't quite sure what was even going on. It all seemed like some kind of idiotic prank. Maybe someone really decided to play a prank on me. Ciara soothed herself. But Eugene knows how much I don't like pranks. Oh, I don't like it. Ciara got up from the table and walked around the room. She knew this restaurant had 2 banquet rooms. The note was probably referring to just the second, smaller banquet room. Ciara didn't immediately decide to head there. It still felt very much like some kind of joke. Maybe she shouldn't fall for it then. But on the other hand, if someone with a dubious sense of humor decided to play a prank on the wedding, why not play along with Eugene? Ciara still had hope that she just wouldn't find that small banquet hall. But no. Her gaze traitorously stopped just outside the small banquet hall sign. She glanced at her watch once more. It took her about 5 minutes to think about it. Then Ciara carefully opened the door and peered inside. The room was in disrepair, with chairs on the tables and decorations lying on the floor. Toward one of those decorations, some girl, most likely a waitress, was clinging passionately to her newfound husband. Ciara went numb. That's it. That's it. That's enough, Eugene quietly muttered, barely moving his tongue. Ciara watched in silence. Oh, so there you are. Amélie's joyful voice sounded. We've been looking all over the restaurant for you. And here we are, a wedding without the newlyweds. The woman didn't have time to finish her sentence. She too had looked into the unfortunate room. Ciara turned around and quickly ran to the exit. Amélie tried to catch up with her. Eugene finally realized that he had been spotted. He jumped up, but only managed to walk a few steps and collapsed. Ciara, my girl, I beg you, wait. Her mother-in-law urged her, catching up with her at the door of the restaurant. Don't, please. You were right. Then I have no place in your family. Stop it. What are you saying? What am I saying? Why don't you check with your son? What a fool I was. How long has he been playing me for? Wait, give me just 1 minute, Amélie pleaded. I can imagine what you're feeling right now, but I'm just as confused as you are. I don't think we should jump to conclusions. Amélie, I understand your desire to protect your son, but how can you jump to conclusions? You saw it all yourself. I did. Amélie nodded. But this is nothing like my son. Let's do this. Will you give Stephen and me at least 12 hours? Now you promise me that in those 12 hours you won't do anything stupid and you won't run away. We'll take Eugene back to our place. You saw the state he's in. Okay, Ciara agreed grudgingly. But I don't know what will change in the meantime. At least we'll try to figure it out. Don't worry, there's no shame yet, except for you and me. No one's seen Eugene. I'll go back and tell the guests that the newlyweds have decided to celebrate at home alone. We'll try to get Eugene out of here without being seen. You go home. But again, please don't do anything stupid. "I'll try," Ciara said, turning around and walking toward the house in her wedding dress. "Where are you going?" Amelie stopped her. "Let me call you a cab." Her mother-in-law called Ciara a cab and sent her home. Ciara got there in a semi-fainting state. For her, everything that was happening was like a terrible dream that would not end. She collapsed on the couch and sighed heavily. Ciara stared at the ceiling silently, tears streaming from her eyes. She didn't even have the strength to change her clothes. She lay like that for several hours until she was awakened by the intercom ringing. Ciara didn't want to go open the door. She didn't want to do anything at all, but it wouldn't stop ringing. So then she forced herself to get up and open the door. Amelie and Stephen walked into the apartment. "Ciara, you have your laptop next to you. Is it busy?" my father-in-law asked. "Yeah, it was lying around here somewhere." Ciara opened the laptop and handed it to Stephen. "Great. Now you're going to see something." He inserted a small flash drive into the laptop and turned on the video. It turned out to be the restaurant security footage. It showed Eugene standing and talking on the phone. At some point he felt sick, leaned against the wall and tried to go outside. At that point, the waitress stopped Eugene and asked him to come with her. She actually walked him up to the empty banquet room and laid him down on a couch. The waitress then stood at the front door and glanced back and forth at the next room, then at her phone. After reading some message, she stood by the door for a while longer and then approached Eugene. He awkwardly tried to push her away and mumbled something to himself. Then the waitress forcefully tried to kiss him. At the same moment, Ciara looked into the room. "So that's what this is all about," she said with rounded eyes. "I told you we'd figure it out." Amelie summarized the video. "Wait, so Eugene was drugged? How's he feeling right now? We should call the police, request an evaluation." "I don't think we're going to need the police here," Stephen told her. "Eugene is sleeping it off at our house right now. His pulse is fine, his blood pressure's fine. It's okay. He needs his sleep. I did the forensics myself. I just picked up Eugene's glass. I wouldn't mistake this blend for anything. It's just wine and vodka." "What do you mean, vodka?" Ciara was surprised. "We didn't even order vodka." Some waiter was diligently pouring Eugene a strong wine. Vodka it was. I saw, had regular wine, but Eugene, he's not very good with booze. Wine and beer are fine, but anything stronger, his body can't take it. Apparently, the organizers of this performance did not know about such a reaction of Eugene and thought that he would just be tipsy and would fall for some girl. But our fighter fell asleep early. Fantastic. Ciara couldn't get over the shock. So the cameras don't show who was involved in the wine and vodka spiking. No, they didn't have cameras in the kitchen. There are cameras at the bar, but I couldn't get footage there. I could barely get these from the security guard in the lounge. It was the same waitress who poured Eugene's drink, Stephen said. "So we have to talk to that waitress," Ciara whispered. "I'm not sure how they knew you'd get to the other room at the right time." "No, it makes sense," Ciara told her mother-in-law about the 2 mysterious phone calls in the note. "Listen, it's like a movie." Amelie wondered, "Why didn't you tell Eugene everything at once?" "I didn't think it was so serious. I thought it was just some kind of fraud. I didn't want to ruin Eugene's mood over nothing." Ciara sighed. "Yeah," Amelie nodded. "I wonder what his reaction will be when he wakes up." "I don't think it will be soon," Stephen answered. "Knowing some peculiarities of his body, he won't wake up until tomorrow morning." "What are we going to do then?" Ciara asked, confused. "That's right. I suggest we finish what we started. Call your mysterious admirer, tell him that you were wrong, and that you were convinced of what a traitor Eugene was. Thank him and ask him to meet you, preferably right away." Ciara understood, pulled out her phone, and did as Stephen told her. The meeting was set for half an hour later in a nearby public garden. Amelie and Stephen arrived there a little early, pretending to be a couple who decided to take a walk before going to bed. Ciara changed her clothes and went to the public garden 2 minutes before the appointed time. She saw a male figure walking towards her with a brisk gait. The stranger had his cap pulled low. It was impossible to tell who it was from afar. Why didn't you want to give me your phone number that time, Kiara? You wouldn't have learned so much, the man said cheerfully and took off his cap. So it's you, Kiara exclaimed. Before her stood her former classmate Noah Salvador. I don't know how to thank you. No way. It's enough to go on a date with me. How did you get all that information about Eugene? Connections. Connections, like the waitress at the restaurant where you work who can pour vodka into wine just in time? Chiara was slapped hard before she could finish. You used to be just an indecisive person, but now you've become even more vicious and pathetic. Suddenly, Ciara was approached by her father-in-law and mother-in-law. What, so this is the show organizer? Stephen asked. I see. But I think he could be prosecuted for slander. And if the actions with drinks are qualified as injury to health. Oh, I'm afraid he won't get off with a suspended sentence, he said. Chiara, I'm sorry, Noah said pitifully. I just loved you all these years. I can't stand to see you, you bastard. Ciara turned away and looked at Stephen and Emily. Well, Ciara, I think this man's fate is in your hands, her mother-in-law said calmly. What am I supposed to do with him? Ciara sighed and turned to Noah again. Then that's it, get out of here. But if I see you anywhere, even casually again, we will seek a criminal case. Do you understand? Yes, Noah answered obediently. He turned around and walked quickly towards the exit. Stephen and Emily drove Ciara to their family cottage. They chatted in the kitchen and mocked the previous day. As it turned out, the rest of the wedding guests had guessed nothing and continued to celebrate without the bride and groom. Eugene woke up the next day with a terrible hangover and huge memory lapses. He didn't even remember any of the waitresses. Chiara and her mother-in-law and father-in-law decided not to tell him anything. So unusually began a new family page in the life of a modest girl, Chiara.